We weren't new to the cold. That's what made it worse. I'd hunted the Upper Peninsula for 20 years, trapped hare in waist-deep snow, tracked elk through ice fog, survived blizzards that bent trees and turned the air white. But this storm wasn't natural. It rolled in like a lid sealing the world shut. One minute, the horizon was blue with distance. The next, it was gone. Just an ocean of falling snow swallowing everything beyond reach. There were 5 of us when it began. Me, Garrett, Luca, Tomas, and Roy. We'd been dropped by snowmobile near Copper Harbor and hiked in on snowshoes to a remote shack we called the Narrows Cabin. It sat deep in a pine valley, hours from anything, and once the snow came in hard, that distance tripled. The plan was to spend a week out there. No phones, no GPS, radios only if someone got lost. We had enough supplies, dehydrated rations, jerky, whiskey, to last 10 days, maybe more. But on the 4th day, the wind changed. It came down the ridge like a scream, not howling but pressing, like the forest itself exhaled. And when we woke that morning, the world had vanished. The cabin door was snowed shut. We had to tunnel out with shovels in hands. Beyond the trees, everything was white, sky and ground indistinguishable. Garrett swore he saw movement beyond the nearest pine. Luca said it was just the wind playing tricks. We stayed inside most of that day, keeping the fire alive. No one said it, but we were already rationing. Tomas cut back his portions first. Roy tried the radio but got nothing, just static. That night, we heard the first sound. It wasn't an animal. I've heard wolves, bears, cougars. This was off. It had rhythm, like words spoken too slow to understand. Low, dry syllables. A sound like something learning to speak by imitating breath. Roy joked it was the wind having a conversation. Nobody laughed. On the 5th day, the wind settled. A false calm. That's when we realized Garrett was gone. His boots were still by the door, his coat missing, but no one heard him leave. Luca swore he was asleep in the bunk next to him just before dawn. We searched until our legs burned. Followed drag marks in the snow that ended in nothing. No trail, no blood, just a line, like something had been pulled into the sky. Roy started talking about frost madness, said maybe Garrett wandered off. But I saw the look in his eyes. He didn't believe it. None of us did. We decided to keep watch in pairs, rotate every few hours. I was with Luca on the first shift. We kept the fire high, not just for heat, but light. It was strange how much the dark listened in those woods. Every whisper felt swallowed, every breath returned heavier. We sat in silence mostly, but after a while, Luca spoke. "You ever hear of the Wendigo?" he asked. I nodded. "Folklore. Stories from the Algonquins. Demon of the snow, feeds on the desperate." "Not just desperate," he said, "the hungry." I looked at him then. "You saying Garrett was eaten?" He didn't answer, but his silence said enough. On the 6th day, Tomas started coughing blood. He'd been quiet since Garrett vanished, didn't want to eat. Claimed he saw shadows at the edge of the tree line. Said they were waiting. He tried to warm himself by the fire, but his body was shaking too hard. That night, he didn't come back inside. We found him the next morning half buried in snow, face twisted, not in fear but something worse. Recognition, like he'd seen something he remembered. His hands were clutching something tight. We had to pry them open. Inside was a single strip of frozen flesh, not his. That's when Roy started whispering, "It's starting." We burned Tomas's body. I don't know if it was for him or for us. We told ourselves it was the right thing. But the truth, we were afraid of what he might become. The fire took hours. Smoke turned black halfway through. That night, none of us spoke. We just sat in a triangle near the door, guns across our laps. Outside, the forest didn't move, but the air did. It shifted in waves like something breathing, something huge, and somewhere out there between the gusts and the branches, I swear I heard my name. Not called, repeated, like someone testing how it felt on their tongue. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. And in the morning, Luca was gone. Luca's bunk was still made, but his boots were gone. No note, no signs of struggle. Just 3 men sitting around a cold fire, afraid to speak the obvious truth. None of us heard him leave. Not even a floorboard creaked. It was Roy who noticed first. The door hadn't been opened. Not all the way. The snow outside the cabin was undisturbed, but when he touched the handle, it was frozen shut. Not like frost, like ice poured from the inside, sealing it after he left. "Maybe he went out through the window," Roy muttered, trying to convince himself. But even as he said it, he backed away from the sill. There were no tracks outside the window, no impressions in the snow, no sign of entry or exit, just undisturbed white, like Luca had never been. But there were footprints inside the cabin, 2 sets leading to his bunk. One set was bare, long, toes unnaturally spread, not animal, not human. I followed the tracks with my eyes, then up to the ceiling. Above Luca's bed, there was something etched into the wood, 3 claw marks in the rafter, deep and curved inward. Maybe it got inside, I said. Roy blinked. How? I didn't answer. What was the point? It hadn't used the door. It hadn't used the window. It didn't need to. That day, we didn't go outside. We didn't speak unless we had to. By then, we were each quietly counting what remained. Food, ammunition, the hours of daylight. The storm hadn't lifted. The wind was sharper now, cutting sideways through the cracks. The temperature dropped below 0. Every breath inside the cabin steamed like smoke. We took shifts sleeping. Roy passed out first. I stayed up with my back to the fire and my rifle across my knees. Outside, something paced along the tree line. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. It wasn't a guess, it was certainty, like sensing a heartbeat in the dark. When I finally dozed off, I dreamt of chewing, teeth grinding down bone. But it wasn't me doing the eating. It was Garrett, or something that had his face. When I woke, Roy was sitting at the table staring at something in his hands, a small bundle of cloth. I found it in Luca's bag, he said. Inside the bundle was a bone, clean, whittled down to a sharp point. Humanoid. Roy looked up at me. You think he couldn't finish the sentence. I didn't want him to. That evening, we heard the voice again. It wasn't a howl or a scream. It was a name, mine. Evan. Drawn out, slow, like a breath turned into speech, dry, deliberate. Evan, Roy gripped his rifle tighter. We leave tomorrow, dawn. Snow be damned. I agreed. We packed what we could, ditched the heavy gear, just survival packs, ammo, water, and salt. Salt, Roy said, was in the stories, old tales, old rules. Salt protected you from things that walked like men but weren't. We slept in turns again, or tried. Sometime in the night, I heard chewing, not in my dream, in the room. I sat up slow and turned toward Roy. He was crouched near the fire, hunched over something. I called his name. He turned too slowly. His mouth was wet. What are you doing? I asked. He stared at me. His pupils were too large, reflecting the flames. I'm just hungry. He looked down at what he held in his hands, a strip of meat, not from our packs. I rose to my feet. Roy, what is that? He dropped it, like it burned him, but I saw it before it fell. Skin still on. Fingers. Luca. Roy backed away. I didn't kill him. I just found it outside. I thought it was animal at first, but then he stopped himself. His eyes watered. I wasn't going to eat it, he whispered. But you were, I said. The silence between us was longer than it should have been. In the old stories, the Wendigo isn't born, it's made. When someone eats human flesh in the wilderness, in desperation, they open themselves to it. They invite it. They become it. I didn't sleep that night. I just watched Roy sit by the fire and cry into his hands. By morning, the storm had stopped. The air was glass clear, blue sky above, and the trail ahead barely visible beneath the snow. We didn't speak. We just left. Walked east toward a ranger outpost I remembered from years ago. We made it 6 miles before I noticed Roy limping. He said nothing, just winced with each step. When we stopped for a break, I saw why. His boots were tight, too tight, and when he pulled one off, his foot was swelling. Not from frostbite. His toes were longer than they should have been, spread out, almost splayed. He looked at me, panicked. I think it's just the cold. But he knew it wasn't. So did I. We kept walking. What else could we do? By nightfall, we found a half-collapsed lean-to from a hunting group who passed through months ago. A tarp, some old logs, frozen cans of beans. Better than nothing. Roy lay down, his breathing shallow, his eyes rimmed with red. Before I turned in, he said, "You should tie me up." I looked at him. "I mean it," he said, "just in case." So I did, with rope from the sled. Tied his arms to a tree, his legs to the pack. He didn't fight. He just stared at me and whispered, "If I start talking in your voice, don't listen." The wind rose again. This time I didn't hear my name. I heard his, whispered through the pines, calling him home. By morning, Roy was gone. The knots I tied were still there, loose, frayed, dusted with snow, but empty. The pack he'd been lashed to had been torn, not cut, ripped open from the side like a bear had clawed through it. Only there were no tracks. None from him. None leading away. There wasn't even a body-shaped depression in the snow, just rope slowly swaying in the wind. I didn't call out, I knew better. Sound was bait out here. Instead, I packed what I could and moved east again. The air had changed. It didn't bite anymore, it watched. I could feel it every time I turned a corner around a thicket or ducked beneath snow-heavy branches, like something waiting to be seen, or worse, copied. I hiked until mid-afternoon until the sun cast long blue shadows across the snow. That's when I saw the trail. Not boot prints, not snowshoe markings, just long, bare footprints, like someone had walked through the woods on freezing ground with nothing on their feet. Each one pressed deep, toe splayed, heels sunken. They were fresh, still sharp at the edges, undisturbed. I crouched and followed them with my eyes. They led toward a rise of granite rock, half exposed from the snow, and into a crack just wide enough for a person to squeeze through sideways. And scrawled into the rock face, just above the opening, were words etched in charcoal, "Hunger makes us all the same." I don't remember deciding to go inside, but I found myself stepping toward the crevice, fingers brushing the stone, ducking low to fit. Inside was pitch black, cold coiled like smoke around my ankles, and then I heard a voice, not a whisper, a clear sentence from deeper inside. "Evan, you made it." It was Roy's voice, but it wasn't Roy. I backed out, fast, stumbled, almost dropped my pack. When I turned, there was no one behind me, but the tracks had doubled. The bare footprints that led to the cave now had a second set, walking out, circling mine. I started running, snow be damned. Every crunch beneath my boots made my skin crawl, like it echoed back louder than it should have. Trees blurred, my breath came sharp. Something was following. I didn't look back. I didn't have to. Whatever it was, whatever had been Roy, it knew I'd heard it. That night, I didn't stop moving until I found an old fire pit. Charred logs, a rusted tin, signs someone had camped there maybe a season ago. I huddled beside the pit, shaking, not from cold, but from knowing that voice, from knowing what it meant. The Wendigo doesn't just hunt, it learns, it mimics, it waits until it knows enough about you to become you. That's why Luca had been taken, why Garrett never screamed, why Roy gave in, and maybe why my father never came back. Because somewhere along this trail, years ago, he must have heard his own name spoken from behind the trees. And maybe, just like me, he followed it too far. The fire I built that night barely caught. My hands wouldn't stop trembling. Every crack in the woods made me flinch. I didn't sleep. At one point, I heard footsteps behind me, bare, slow, deliberate. But when I turned, there was nothing, just trees and the glow of dying embers. And then I heard my father's voice. Evan, not shouted. Spoken, calm, certain, like he'd just woken up from a long nap and found me beside the fire. "Son, it's me." I closed my eyes, didn't answer, didn't even breathe. "I knew you'd come," it said. It was behind the tree line, just out of reach, just close enough for my memory to color in the rest. I heard him laugh, low and quiet, like he used to when telling stories by lantern light. "I left something for you." I didn't move, but the thing kept speaking. "There's a shelter near the creek fork. You remember the one." It paused. "I left my notes there. Go find them. You'll understand." Then it was gone. No retreating steps, no sound of snow, just gone. I stayed frozen for a long time, rifle clutched to my chest, and then I started walking again, east toward the river forks I vaguely remembered from Dad's maps. If he'd really left something, if it was real, maybe I'd finally get answers. The next morning, I reached it. The creek had frozen over, but I recognized the outcrop from old photos. A collapsed ranger station sat beside the bend, half swallowed by snow and moss. Its roof had caved in, but the back room still stood. Barely. Inside, I found a crate sealed in wax canvas, old, weather-worn. Inside were maps and a journal, my father's. The handwriting was unmistakable. It started with observations, snowfall, game migrations, coordinates. Then, deeper in, the entries grew fragmented. March 12th, something followed me today. Sounded like a man, but the voice was off, dry, like it had to force the words. March 15th, it knows my name. March 18th, I saw myself last night, across the fire. Same face, same coat, but the eyes weren't mine. March 21, I ate what I shouldn't have. I didn't know. I'm changing. It's inside me now. The last entry was barely legible. I'm not dead, but I'm not me anymore. If he comes, if Evan finds this, tell him not to listen. Tell him to burn this place down. Tell him I'm sorry. I dropped the journal. Behind me, something creaked. A branch? No. closer, like the floorboards shifting under weight. I turned. A figure stood in the doorway. My father, or what used to be him. He smiled. I froze. The figure standing in the doorway was tall, taller than I remembered my father being, but draped in his same old canvas coat. The patches were all there, the frayed sleeves, the rust-colored stitching. Even the way he stood, one shoulder slightly lower, like he was always leaning into the wind. But the face was wrong, too thin, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, eyes that were black, not like pupils, but like someone had hollowed them out and filled them with soot, and when it smiled, the skin around its lips cracked like frozen leather. Evan, it said again, like it had rehearsed the word 1,000 times. I didn't respond. My hands were inside my coat, clutching the rifle, but I didn't raise it. Not yet. The thing stepped forward. Don't be afraid, it's really me. A pause. I left the journal for you. That voice, it had layers to it, like multiple mouths speaking slightly out of sync. My father's tone floated just beneath something deeper, hungrier. You don't have to go, it said, gesturing toward the collapsing door. It's safer here, warmer. I looked around. No heat, no fire, just rotten frost. Still, I couldn't speak. My throat felt glued shut. I know it's hard, it continued. The snow, the loss, but the truth is, it doesn't have to end the way you think. Then it did something horrible. It knelt and whispered, I was hungry once too. That's when I knew. Whatever this was, it wasn't here to kill me. It was here to convince me. I raised the rifle. Its expression didn't change. It didn't flinch. It just waited, like it knew how the story ended. My finger hovered over the trigger. Evan, it said again, slower this time, like it was tasting the name. You came all this way. You read the journal. You know. I fired. The shot tore through its shoulder, throwing it backward into the snow. It didn't scream. It just stared at me from the ground, like I had disappointed it. And then it laughed. Not my father's laugh, not mine. Something hollow, hungry, mocking. I ran, no direction, just away. Branches tore at my coat, the cold whipped against my face. I ran until my legs gave out, collapsing beside a fallen birch, lungs on fire. And behind me, the laugh carried, soft but steady, closer than it should have been. I blacked out. When I woke, the wind had changed. Snow was falling hard again, white curtains of silence. But I wasn't alone. A body lay beside me, half covered in snow. I crawled over, heart pounding. It was Roy, or what was left of him. His face was intact but pale, mouth frozen in an open gasp. His limbs were twisted, arms too long, legs bent wrong, like something had reshaped him from the inside. In one hand he held a scrap of torn fabric, a sleeve, mine. I stumbled back. He'd been wearing me, or something had been using him to become me. That's when the realization landed hard. The Wendigo didn't just mimic the dead, it used them, like shells, like costumes. I checked my pack. The journal was gone. Panic rose again. I needed it, to prove what I'd seen, to warn anyone who might come after. But then I saw it. Another trail of prints in the snow, bare feet, deep and deliberate. And they led toward a cave just beneath a rocky ridge, marked again by charcoal words above the mouth. He who listens becomes. No, no more caves, no more voices. I turned and began moving in the opposite direction, toward the tree line, where the evergreens grew tighter and darker. I didn't have a map anymore, but I remembered Dad's drawings, how the land dipped and curved. If I could reach the southern slope, I could descend back toward Copper Range, maybe find the old Ranger Road. But the snow grew deeper, heavier, and the howling began again, not like before, not distant. This was near, too near, and it wasn't just one, it was two, then three. Different voices, staggered, some shrill, others guttural, all familiar, Garrett, Roy. Even my own voice, warbled and distant, echoing through the trees, calling me. I ducked behind a ridge and pressed into the snow, heart thudding. They were toying with me now. Hunting, yes, but slowly, carefully, like they were waiting for me to panic, to scream, to respond. Because that's when the transformation begins. They feed on imitation, on recognition. I held my breath, didn't move for nearly 20 minutes. When I rose again, the voices had faded, but the woods felt changed, heavier, denser, more aware. That night I found shelter in a hollowed tree, too small for anything big to enter. I built no fire, ate nothing, slept with my back to the bark and my eyes open, and dreamed of mouths within mouths. I awoke to footsteps circling, crunching softly around the tree. A familiar voice whispered, "Evan, wake up. You're not safe." Rachel's voice, From the hunt. She died years ago, it whispered again. Come out. I found the trail. I bit down on my tongue, stayed still. More voices joined, some I didn't recognize. One was a child, one was me, mocking my own words from earlier in the woods. A laugh, my laugh, then silence, long, oppressive silence. I didn't move until daylight, and when I stepped outside, there were no prints in the snow, just mine. And Roy's journal, sitting on the stump outside the tree, open to a final page I hadn't seen before. Written in a spidery scrawl, it wants to be you. Don't let it. The moment you answer, it begins. I closed the book, tied it to my belt, and kept walking south. I didn't stop again, not even when the trees whispered, not even when I heard Dad say he was proud of me. I didn't answer, because I knew now every response was a seed, and this forest knew how to grow things in silence. I made it out. At least I think I did. The southern slope took me 3 days longer than it should have. My compass was useless, spinning aimlessly even on clear ground. At some point, I realized I was navigating more by instinct than sense, moving not toward landmarks, but away from certain feelings, certain trees, pockets of cold that lingered too long. When I finally stumbled onto the old ranger road, it was overgrown and barely visible under the crust of snow. But I recognized the warped trail closed sign leaning against a fallen pine. Beyond that, the shell of a ranger station, long abandoned. I don't remember knocking on the door. I only remember waking up inside, with a half-rotted blanket over me and a fire already burning in the grate. There was no one there, no footprints, no boots, just heat and wood smoke and the bitter stench of deer fat. For days after that, I waited, too weak to leave. And at night, I'd hear scratching at the outer walls, never loud, just enough to let me know it knew where I was, and it was patient. I read the final pages of my father's journal again during those nights. The entries grew more scattered, like he had trouble holding on to language. Words slurred across the page, phrases repeated, but the intent remained. Once it hears your voice, it keeps it. Once it knows your name, it calls it. Once you see its face, you begin to forget your own. I don't know how long he survived, but I don't think he ever died. Not properly. There's a passage near the end, barely legible but still etched deep. You'll have to choose. Die as yourself or live as it. Eventually a rescue team found me. Snowmobiles, radios, headlamps, the real world roaring back in. I told them a tree fell, broke my leg, that I survived on melted snow and sheer luck. They didn't ask many questions. I guess people rarely do when the lost come home. But not everything returned with me. My reflection feels off now, delayed, like it's waiting. I hear voices sometimes, my voice, on quiet mornings, from rooms I haven't entered. Once, in the grocery store, I heard my father laugh from behind the freezer aisle. I turned, but of course no one was there. And sometimes when I'm asleep, I dream of snow. Not just falling, but watching, layer by layer, burying the world in silence. It's been months since the trail, but I still don't say my name out loud. Not to anyone. And I never ever answer when someone calls me from the woods, especially if it sounds like someone I love. Conclusion, 300 words. Somewhere deep in the Appalachian wilderness, there is a trail that no longer exists on any official map. It doesn't have a name, no markers, no footprints that last more than a day, but those who find it rarely return the same, or at all. People assume the wild is indifferent, that nature, no matter how harsh, plays by rules we can study and understand. But that's only true until you stray too far, until you walk a path that doesn't belong to you. My father learned that the hard way, and so did I. We weren't meant to walk that trail again. We weren't meant to remember it. But something in those woods remembered us. Something that waits. It doesn't chase. It doesn't kill in haste. It listens. It imitates. And it waits for you to make the first mistake. By speaking, by answering, by believing. I survived by keeping my silence, by remembering who I was and who I wasn't. But some days I wonder if even that was enough. Because there are moments late at night when I wake to the sound of someone walking down the hallway. My dog doesn't bark, my lights don't flicker, but the footsteps stop just outside my bedroom door. And then I hear it, my voice, whispering through the crack. Evan, you left something behind. I never answer because I know that voice isn't mine, not anymore. I'd been traveling solo across the Southwest for months, chasing that sense of peace only the wild could offer. Arizona was next on my list. The towering pines of the high desert called to me more than the red rocks or tourist traps. I'd read about a secluded RV campsite just outside the Navajo Nation, tucked away in a stretch of forest the locals called Canyon Pines. No hookups, no cell service, just me, the trees, and the wind. It was late October when I arrived, and the air carried that heavy stillness unique to the shoulder season. Too cold for most campers, too early for snow. The dirt road that led to the site was barely maintained, lined with skeletal trees that had begun shedding their bark. My GPS had already died 10 miles back, and the last road sign I saw was warped beyond legibility. When I pulled into the clearing where I planned to set up, the first thing I noticed was how quiet it was. No birds, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive silence that seemed to soak into the RV's frame. I parked beneath a cluster of ancient pines and stepped out, boots crunching dry needles. To the east, the ground sloped gently toward a gulch filled with low shrubs and jagged boulders. Beyond that, nothing but forest. That evening, just as the sun was bleeding into the mountains, I decided to hike a short loop trail that ran along the canyon rim. About halfway through, I saw something strange, a tall pine with long, deep gouges carved down its bark, almost like claws. At its base were symbols etched into the dirt, spirals and triangles, and the remains of what looked like a small animal skull surrounded by ash. I backed away quickly. Some kind of offering, I thought, maybe from a local ceremony or a prank by hikers. Still, I marked the location on my map and returned to camp uneasy. When I got back, a pickup truck had pulled into the site across the clearing. A man stood outside it, lean and weathered, wearing a faded ranger's uniform. I called out to greet him, but he didn't wave, just watched me motionless, as if sizing me up. "Evening," I offered. He finally nodded. "You alone?" "Yeah, just passing through. Thought this place might be quiet." "It is," he said flatly. "Too quiet, some would say." I laughed awkwardly. "You patrol this area often?" "I don't patrol here," he replied. "No one does. Not anymore." Something about his tone made my stomach twist. "You planning to stay long? Just a night or two?" He looked at the setting sun. "Leave before dark. Don't let it get too quiet. You understand?" I opened my mouth to respond, but he was already turning back toward his truck. As the engine roared and he drove away, dust curling up behind his tires, I realized I hadn't seen a badge on his shirt. No radio, no sidearm. I didn't see him again. That night, I made a fire and cooked a simple meal. As I sat with my back to the RV, I listened for the chirp of crickets or the cry of an owl, anything. But it was as if the world had pressed mute. The fire flickered lower and I tossed on another log. That's when I heard it. A low, rasping whisper, so faint I thought it might have been wind, coming from the direction of the gulch. It didn't form words at first, just a breath-like sound. Then it grew clearer. My name, twice, whispered low and slow. I stood up fast, nearly knocking over my chair. Flashlight in hand, I scanned the trees, the slope of the canyon, the edge of my firelight. Nothing, no movement. "Hello?" I called. "Is someone out there?" Silence. I backed into the RV, locked the door, and drew the blinds. Inside, the heater ticked and clicked as it warmed the air block, but every other sound was muffled by that unnatural hush outside. I climbed into bed, but left my boots on. Could have been a hiker, or maybe the ranger messing with me, or maybe not. Later that night, I awoke to a soft thump. Something had brushed against the side of the RV. I held my breath, another thump. Then the unmistakable sound of footsteps circling slowly around the vehicle. I peeked through a sliver in the blind but saw nothing. Then a low voice, gravelly and too deep, spoke directly outside the door. "Let me in. I'm hurt." I didn't move. The voice again. "Please, it's cold." Whoever it was, they hadn't knocked. I stayed silent, still, waiting. Then the voice shifted. "I'm you." The footsteps faded. The silence returned. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By morning, I found a long, pale handprint smeared across the passenger side window. I hadn't touched that side in days. On the morning of the 14th day, I decided to shut the sensors down. Something about the data had begun to unravel my sense of reality. I couldn't trust my own ears anymore, or the sounds that echoed through the ice. I thought maybe, just maybe, cutting the stream would help reset my focus, let me finish the expedition as a scientist, not a sleepless wreck haunted by dreams and whispers. But as I stepped out of the tent, I found something waiting on the ice. There, maybe 20 feet from the shoreline, lay one of my motion sensors. It had been ripped from its mount, wires dangling like veins, and placed carefully, intentionally, facing back toward the tent. It sat upright, balanced. The ice around it showed no signs of tampering, no boot prints, no animal tracks, nothing. I backed away slowly, eyes darting across the tree line. Nothing moved. The wind was absent again, suffocatingly still. I carried the sensor back to the tent with stiff arms, resisting the urge to hurl it into the trees. As I reconnected it, something strange occurred. It turned on by itself. No boot sequence, no delay. The screen blinked twice and began recording again as if it had never been disabled. The logs from that day showed a 21-minute gap, just enough time for it to have been removed and walked across the ice. I spent hours going through the system after that, scanning for errors, rechecking timestamps, checking for tampering. But I couldn't find a single irregularity in the data, only the impossible physical relocation of the device. That night, the wind returned. It moaned through the pines like a warning. I huddled inside the tent, lights dimmed, my laptop screen casting a soft glow over the nylon walls. Then just after midnight, I heard it again, my mother's voice. Not a memory, not a dream, her exact cadence, calling my name from somewhere on the lake. Eli. One long note, rising in tone, then drifting into silence. I froze. No speakers, no broadcasts, no devices in the tent could have produced that. The sound came from outside, from the ice. I wrapped myself in my coat and crept toward the flap. The world was bathed in blue moonlight, the lake glowing like a sheet of glass under the stars. I saw nothing, no movement, just the wind dancing lightly across the surface. But when I stepped onto the ice and listened closely, I heard the knock. 1, pause, 2, pause, 3. 6 seconds later, another sequence. It was trying to talk. I knelt, pressing my ear directly to the ice. Eli. This time the voice was different, not my mother. Someone else, someone younger. A voice I couldn't immediately place, but I knew it. It was my college roommate, Tom. He died 2 years ago in a climbing accident. Come down, it said. I staggered back. My heart pounded against my ribs so hard I thought I might collapse. This wasn't a hallucination. The sound came from beneath the ice. But no one could be under the ice. The lake was sealed, frozen nearly 5 feet thick, solid all the way down, unless, no, I couldn't go there. I wouldn't. I locked the tent shut that night and shoved my earplugs in so hard I nearly bruised my eardrums. Sleep didn't come, only a kind of mental stasis, frozen between fear and disbelief. The 15th day brought a blizzard. Snow swept across the ridge like powdered ghosts. I used the downtime to pack early samples, preparing for the end of the expedition. I decided I'd leave 3 days ahead of schedule. My research was sufficient. No publication was worth staying out here another night. But the storm trapped me. Wind knocked over one of the antenna rigs and partially buried the solar array. I'd have to dig it out before I could recharge the satellite transmitter and call for the snowmobile pickup. I huddled inside, listening to the wind scream over the tent fabric. And through it, I heard the tapping. Now it came every hour. Once, twice, 6 seconds. 3 times, 6 seconds. Always the same. Then it stopped. Around dusk, I ventured out to use the latrine. Snow had piled high, erasing all previous tracks. I trudged through knee-deep powder, trying not to look at the lake. But something made me glance sideways. The snow atop the lake had been cleared in perfect circles, 6 of them, large enough to stand in. Nothing around them, no path, no prints. Just 6 bare ice circles like something beneath had melted its way up, trying to mark the surface. Or worse, trying to signal something. I turned and ran back to the tent. That night, the dream returned. But it wasn't a dream. I stood on the ice, barefoot, my breath fogging up around me like mist. I could see beneath the surface now, shapes moving slowly in the dark water. Long limbs, hollow eyes, faces that looked almost human but too thin, stretched, starved. They pressed against the ice, whispering things in voices I knew. Then one lifted its arm and pointed, right at me. I awoke screaming, drenched in sweat and tangled in my blanket. My gear was beeping. One of the sensors had activated, recording movement directly beneath the tent. I scrambled outside with a flashlight. The beam flickered, briefly catching on the tree line before settling on the ground beneath me. There, just beyond the edge of the canvas, were handprints, pressed into the snow. 5 fingers, long, uneven, like someone or something had reached up from the lake and crawled across the snow. I didn't sleep at all after that. By dawn, I had packed most of my gear and was preparing to leave on foot if necessary. I would hike to the ranger station if I had to, but when I stepped outside that morning, I saw something that stopped me cold. The trail I'd made the day before? Gone, replaced with a set of new tracks, my own boot prints, leading onto the lake. But I had never walked out there during the storm. They ended at the center. And at the center, there was a new hole, roughly 5 feet wide, cracked in a circle, as if something beneath had been pushing up. Waiting for continue. For several minutes, I stood frozen just outside the tent, staring at that dark, jagged hole in the ice. It looked wrong. Too round, the edges lipped upward, like something massive had broken through from underneath and crawled out, not in. The snow around it remained untouched. No trail, no debris, just that singular gaping hole in the middle of the frozen lake, and a ring of cracked frost curling outward like shattered glass. I fought every instinct that screamed at me to run. Instead, I walked slowly toward the hole, not out of bravery, but a numb, creeping disbelief. My boots crunched lightly on the ice as I stepped into one of the 6 perfect circles from the day before, now faint beneath the new snow. Each step brought with it a drop in temperature, or perhaps it was just the fear sinking deeper. At the edge of the hole, I knelt and pointed my flashlight down. The beam cut through maybe 5 feet of water, illuminating nothing but dark silt and air bubbles clinging to submerged cracks. No movement, no body, no bones. Then, as I leaned closer, I noticed something bobbing gently just below the surface. A jawbone. Human, from the look of it. Not fresh, yellowed and cracked like it had been submerged for decades, and still attached to something longer, thicker, trailing deeper into the blackness. I staggered back so quickly I nearly slipped. That was it. Whatever had been beneath this lake wasn't just mimicking voices. It wasn't just some predator. It was a collector, a keeper, and perhaps it had once been human, until isolation, starvation, and something older twisted it into what it was now, a Wendigo. The name rang like an ancient echo in my skull. I'd heard the term before in obscure anthropology texts, Native American legends, mostly Algonquian in origin. It was said to be the embodiment of insatiable hunger and winter madness, a creature that lived off flesh and grew hungrier the more it consumed. But those stories had always sounded metaphorical, symbolic, parables of caution. Now they felt like survival manuals. I sprinted back to camp. No more hesitation. I didn't bother repacking everything, only grabbed what I needed: emergency beacon, GPS, survival pack, food bars. I left the rest. Whatever remained in that tent, it could stay. I turned on the emergency beacon, praying the signal would be picked up quickly. The storm from the night before had calmed, but the clouds loomed again on the horizon, thick and swollen with more snow. I set off along the tree line, using the ridgeline as a bearing. It was supposed to be a 14-mile trek to the nearest ranger outpost, a long shot in worsening weather, but better than another night by that lake. Each hour felt like walking through wet cement. My body was sluggish from cold and terror. My ears rang with phantom whispers. Sometimes they were family members, sometimes my own voice echoing from the woods behind me. Once I thought I heard Tom again. I refused to look back. By late afternoon, frostbite had begun to creep into my fingers. I stopped to wrap them with gauze from the med kit and forced myself to eat. I hadn't even noticed how starved I was until I bit into a protein bar and felt an almost animalistic craving. The hunger brought a new fear. The legend of the Wendigo wasn't just about a creature out there, it was about what it turned you into. I had been alone, isolated, cold, and afraid for weeks. Was that part of it? Was it trying to make me like it? I moved faster. At sundown, just before the last amber light vanished behind the trees, I saw smoke, thin and gray, curling above the ridge. My pulse exploded with relief. It had to be the ranger cabin. But before I could shout, a sound snapped my head to the side. It was a branch, snapped clean in two, not by the wind. I ducked behind a boulder and peered into the woods. Silhouetted between the trees was a tall figure, gaunt, taller than any man I'd ever seen. Its limbs hung oddly, like they didn't know quite where they belonged. Its skin was grayish with patches of dark, matted hair along the back, and it was sniffing the air. I held my breath. It didn't move like a hunter. It moved like something trying to remember how to be human. The wind shifted. The thing paused, then turned its head slowly in my direction. I didn't wait. I ran. Branches tore at my jacket. Snow flew in my face. My lungs screamed with cold as I charged toward the cabin. I could hear it behind me, not running, just moving, fast and deliberate. I didn't look back. The door to the ranger cabin loomed through the trees. I threw myself at it, nearly collapsing through the threshold. Inside, the air was stale and smoky, and a small iron stove glowed in the corner. I slammed the door shut and locked it. The cabin was empty. I stumbled to the radio on the wall and began flipping switches. Static. Then, a voice. Bridger Teton Dispatch. This is Forest Service Station. Receiving distress beacon. Do you copy? I nearly sobbed. This is Elias Ward. I'm at the remote station, Bridger Ridge. Something is out here. I'm not alone. The door shuttered behind me. 3 knocks, even, measured, not aggressive, not frantic, as if something was asking to be let in. The radio crackled again, but I couldn't hear it anymore. I backed away, holding a fire poker in my shaking hands. Through the window, I saw the figure again. Tall and shivering, barely lit by the moonlight. Its eyes were black sockets, but its mouth moved. I couldn't hear the sound, but I read the words on its cracked lips. The poker slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor, its ringing echo swallowed by the suffocating silence of the cabin. I didn't dare move. My breath came in short, panicked huffs, fogging the window as I watched the silhouette on the porch remain perfectly still. It didn't try the handle. It didn't scratch or slam. It just stood there, waiting, watching. The phrase it had mouthed, "Let me stay," looped in my head like a broken tape. Not let me in, like a predator demanding entry. Let me stay, as though this place, this structure, this human shelter represented something it wanted but didn't fully understand. A memory? A longing? No, that was dangerous thinking. Too human to close. I backed away slowly until my shoulder touched the rear wall. The radio continued crackling faintly, someone repeating my name over and over. Elias Ward, Elias, are you there? We have your location. Emergency team inbound. But I didn't answer. I couldn't take my eyes off the figure on the other side of the glass. Then mercifully it turned. Not in disappointment, not in defeat. Just casually, as if it had learned what it needed. And with a strange jerking grace, it moved into the trees, its limbs seeming to forget how to bend at the joints for a moment, like a puppet regaining control of its own strings. In seconds, it was gone. I sank to the floor. It didn't attack. It didn't force its way in. It could have, I knew that. But it didn't. Which was somehow worse. It chose not to. The rescue team arrived just after midnight. I heard the snowmobiles long before I saw them, headlights like twin stars blazing through the woods. They found me huddled near the stove, barely able to speak. I must have looked like a ghost, ice-crusted beard, frostbite blooming across my fingers, eyes wide and unfocused. They asked questions. I answered some. Most I didn't. Back at the ranger base, I was checked over by a medic and given a sedative. For the first time in weeks, I slept. But even in sleep, it was there. The lake, the voices, the thing on the porch, whispering in the voice of my sister, my mother, my own. Whispers that said, let me stay. Weeks passed. They flew me home to Missoula, told me I'd done the right thing, that survival under those conditions was remarkable. The team that went out to the lake found my tent, the remains of the thermal gear, even the spot where I'd broken camp. But the hole in the ice? Gone. Frozen solid. Sensors I'd left were recovered, but the files were corrupted, static, garbled audio. One frame of video showed what looked like ripples under the ice, beneath it, not on the surface. But no one could explain it. No tracks, no bones, no jaw, no proof. My report was filed and shelved. Environmental stress, they called it. Hallucinations due to isolation. I didn't argue, not out loud, but I knew better. I began researching, diving into old archives, anthropological studies, tribal legends. The Algonquian stories weren't just metaphors for cannibalism and madness. They were warnings. The Wendigo isn't just a creature, it's a condition, a virus of loneliness, of hunger, of remembered humanity. And the most terrifying part, it doesn't want to kill you outright. It wants to understand you, to learn your shape, your voice, your desires. Because that's how it grows, One night, while reviewing satellite imagery of the lake area from the week after my extraction, I spotted something. A heat signature. Faint, moving, not a snowdrift, not a moose, but upright, tall, and slowly pacing the edge of the lake, tracing the path I'd once walked, as if repeating the steps, mimicking, practicing, or perhaps waiting. I turned off the monitor. There are places in this world we were never meant to fully understand. Not because they're beyond science or reason, but because they require us to leave something behind to survive them. Compassion, curiosity, hope. Those things don't survive the cold. I tried to go back to work that spring. Taught a few classes, published a paper or two. But the nights grew long again, and the lake never left me. One evening, I found myself standing in my garage, staring at my old snow gear, the beacon, the GPS, my boots. Something inside me stirred, not fear, hunger for silence, for the cold, for it. I slammed the door shut and walked away. That's how it starts, I think. First, you hear a voice you recognize. Then you see something move just beyond the trees, and then eventually you want to go back. Because deep down, something ancient is whispering in your bones, let me stay. And part of you starts to whisper back, maybe I should. Early spring in Missoula still brought chill winds off the mountains. Snow lingered in shaded crevices, and the forest beyond the valley remained half frozen. I moved into a small apartment above a bookstore downtown, trying to wrap myself back into the comforts of civilization. Coffee shops, streetlights, traffic murmurs, all the things I'd once thought boring, even suffocating. But it didn't work. No matter how many noises the city offered, they couldn't mask that silence, the kind that presses in from the trees or settles just under the ice. I started hearing things again. At first I thought it was memory, residual trauma, but then it became more specific. I'd wake in the middle of the night and hear knocking, not at the door but under the floorboards, scraping, shifting, like something pacing from beneath. And then the dreams returned. Not like before, not violent or surreal. They were quiet, too quiet. I'd be standing on the surface of that frozen lake, windless, breath clouding around me. And under the ice, eyes, hundreds of them, some human, some not, watching, blinking slowly, like things waiting to be thawed. One night I woke up to find my apartment colder than it had ever been. I checked the thermostat, normal. I checked the windows, closed, but frost rimmed the inside of the glass. I didn't go back to sleep that night. Instead, I pulled up the archived logs from the expedition. One of the sensors had recorded a string of unusual frequencies right before I lost contact with it. I dismissed them initially as static, but I played them again through new software. The waveform wasn't random, it repeated. A sequence of 4 notes, rising, then falling, and then a silence. When isolated and slowed down, the pitch almost resembled speech. I played it on loop, and after hours of listening, I heard it. My name. Drawn out, warped, but unmistakable. Something had been listening to me up there. Not just mimicking sounds, it had learned. Maybe from the equipment, maybe from me. It hadn't just reached the cabin, it had heard everything. I stopped going outside after that. Even during the day, I'd catch glimpses of something moving in my peripheral vision. At the edge of the park, on rooftops, in reflections. Always too quick to confirm, but not so quick I could doubt. A figure, tall, gaunt, arms too long, always facing away. Always walking just far enough not to be questioned. I contacted the university, asked if any other researchers had reported strange signals from the region. One professor said a grad team near Flathead had their wildlife cameras triggered 5 times by something they couldn't identify. But when they retrieved the footage, all the frames were blank. Not black. Blank. As if something had erased itself. That night, I found claw marks on the inside of my window frame. My apartment was still locked from within. I finally broke. I drove out into the mountains the next morning. No gear, no plan, just a direction. Away. Toward where the peaks still held snow. Toward where trees grew so densely the sun barely touched the floor. I thought if I returned to the silence, if I surrendered, maybe it would stop. I parked at a trailhead near a place called Dead Horse Ridge. Left the keys in the ignition. Walked until I couldn't see the car anymore. Hours passed. Cold crept into my boots. Branches snapped underfoot. Then I heard it again. That voice. My name. Eli. But this time it came from above. I looked up. Perched between the fork of 2 trees was something impossibly still. like a corpse nailed upright, pale skin stretched tight, hollowed eyes reflecting the dim light like animal lenses. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The silence between us said enough. I turned and ran, not away, but deeper. And I realized then I wasn't trying to escape. I was going toward it. Whatever had reached up through that ice, whatever had whispered in the voice of my mother, whatever had learned to mimic the sound of me, it had called me here. And I had answered. Because some part of me, beneath the fear, beneath the logic, wanted to understand. I wanted to know what lay beneath the lake. I wanted to know what waited in the silence. When I finally collapsed near the bank of a shallow creek, the snow began to fall. Thick, slow flakes, no footprints around me, no bird song, just the water barely moving beneath its frozen crust. And then, gently from the tree line, let me stay. But this time, it wasn't a request, it was a promise. And I closed my eyes. I awoke to silence. Not peaceful silence, but the kind that presses on your ears like water. Snow had covered me during the night. My limbs were stiff, my breath shallow. I wasn't dead, but I was closer to it than I'd ever been. Around me, the forest had changed. The trees looked taller, or maybe they just leaned in more. Their shapes seemed less organic and more deliberate, twisting in patterns that felt almost architectural. The snow muffled everything, even the sound of my own movement. It felt like I'd sunk below the surface of reality, into a dreamless void painted white. There were no paths, no tracks. Even my footprints from the day before had vanished. But something else had left a trail. Long drag marks cut through the snow ahead of me, weaving between trunks. Not like a sled or an animal, but like something being pulled. Without thinking, I followed. The trail led to a shallow depression in the ground, an old quarry or a sinkhole, its edges blurred by frost and brush. At the bottom was an opening, not a cave, a shaft, perfectly circular, choked in frost yet faintly warm at its mouth. The air smelled of wet stone and decay. I should have turned back. Every rational instinct screamed that this was the source, the mouth of whatever had haunted me since the lake. But I couldn't turn away. It was like staring down into my own reflection, except it blinked. So I climbed down. The shaft descended for maybe 20 feet, with makeshift handholds in the stone. It was old, too old, carved not by machines, but by hands, or claws. At the bottom, the tunnel widened into a crude hallway of rock. There were markings, scratches like some creature had tried to write, not in words, but in feelings. Desperation, hunger, grief. And then came the sounds. Not echoes, not water, voices, faint, disjointed, whispering things I hadn't heard in years. Don't leave me here. I'm cold. I miss you. Voices of people I'd lost. I began to walk faster, not toward them, just away from myself. The passage opened into a large chamber. My flashlight flickered. I tapped it, flickered again, and then went dark. But the room wasn't. There was a dim internal light, pulsing faintly. The walls, covered in ice, reflected a pale blue glow. Not from any source I could see. It was in the ice, trapped. And behind those translucent walls I saw faces, pressed against the ice, frozen mid-expression. Wide-eyed, mouths open, not in screams, but in surprise. Some were human, some were not. They had too many teeth, or no eyes, or limbs where there shouldn't be limbs. They watched me, they were aware. Then I saw it again. In the center of the room stood a shape, not hunched like before, tall, straight-backed. The Wendigo, if that's what it was, had grown or adapted. It didn't attack, didn't move. It waited. I understood then. It hadn't followed me to the city. It had sensed something else. It had learned from me, from my fear, from my equipment, from my voice, and it had created something new. The real Wendigo, the one beneath the ice, had never left. It didn't need to. Its influence could reach beyond the lake, through whispers, through hunger, through me. I tried to speak. Nothing came. My voice was gone, swallowed. I backed away, but the chamber tilted. No, my sense of balance did. The air felt thicker, heavier, like breathing in grief or memory. The walls began to melt. The ice faces twitched, shifted. One of them, a woman with hollow eyes, turned her head toward me and smiled. I don't know how I got out. I remember the flash of light sunlight. I remember snow on my face, then trees, then boots crunching nearby. A rescue team had found me days after I'd gone missing. I was frostbitten, dehydrated, hypothermic. They said I was lucky to be alive. I knew better, because I hadn't survived by myself. Something had let me go, as if I'd passed a test or served my purpose. I never told anyone the full truth. What could I say? That a creature living beneath the ice lake had learned to copy my voice? That it whispered my name not to lure me but to study me? No one would believe it. But I know this, it's still down there, watching, waiting. Not in anger, but in patience. It doesn't hunt like animals do. It learns, it adapts, and maybe it's no longer alone. Sometimes late at night, I hear scratching on my apartment window. Faint, rhythmic, not threatening, just curious, like a student trying to master a new language, the language of fear. And outside, when I listen closely enough, I still hear footsteps, slow, icy, never quite approaching, as if waiting for the right say hello, in my own voice. They called it the Cold Elk Station, though there hadn't been elk sightings in over a decade. Tucked into the northern stretches of Alberta's protected wilderness, just trees, snow, and sky, it had long since become obsolete. But the Park Service kept it on the maps, a token outpost against poachers and wildfires. And for the winter of my 65th year, it became my home. It wasn't meant to be. I'd officially retired the year prior. Plaque, handshake, a group photo with men half my age and boots too clean for the job. But when the department couldn't find a volunteer to monitor the northern boundary for the off-season, someone had called me. Said it would be short, quiet. Just keep an eye on things, check the fences, file a report every couple of weeks. One last job for old time's sake. I'd said yes, God knows why. Maybe because my wife had passed 2 winters before. Maybe because the house was too quiet. Or maybe because out there, in the deep hush of the boreal forest, I could pretend I was still useful, that I still mattered. Cold Elk Station was a wooden box of a structure, squatting on frost-hardened soil like a forgotten grave marker. It had a narrow cot, a cast-iron stove, and a 2-way radio that only worked on clear days. No running water, just snow melt and discipline. I split wood, cataloged animal prints, tracked the temperature with the same rusted thermometer from the 70s. I saw moose once, heard wolves twice. Mostly, I saw nothing. Until the 4th week. I opened the cabin door one morning, sky still purple with dawn, and there it was. A haunch of meat, fresh, laid neatly on the step. No bag, no wrapper, no note. It looked like venison, thick, red, almost steaming in the cold. But what made me pause, what truly turned my stomach, was the absence of prints. No boot marks, no claw marks, not even a drag trail. Just meat, like it had fallen from the sky. I stood over it for a long while. Then I brought it inside. I know how that sounds. But it was 90 to 30 that morning, and I hadn't seen a single soul in 28 days. Something primal overtook my better judgment. Hunger? Maybe curiosity. I wrapped the meat in cloth, stored it in the icebox, and spent the rest of the day scanning the woods for movement. Nothing. The next morning, there was more. A rib rack, perfectly sliced. This time, a single crow feather laid beside it. I didn't eat it. Not yet. I reported the sightings to dispatch, but reception was garbage. All they got was static, maybe a few clipped words. I scribbled in my logbook instead. 0211 unusual drop. Venison appears fresh. No prints, no sign of predator. The meat kept coming. Every other day now. Always clean, always fresh, always without sign of delivery. One day a flank, another a full shoulder. Once a whole rib cage laid gently across the porch like an offering. And I started to cook it. Just a little. Just once, I told myself. But it was good. No gamey tang, no toughness. Tender like restaurant cuts. I tried not to think about it. After all, it looked like deer, smelled like it too. And then came the tooth. It was just sitting on the wooden step one morning, glinting like a pearl against the frost, human, molar, old. And I knew, in the way you sometimes know things without proof, that it hadn't fallen out of some hiker's mouth. I left it on the porch and didn't open the door again that day. That night, something brushed against the cabin wall, a whisper of motion, barely audible, then again, closer, slower. I grabbed my old rifle from the rack and sat by the window, watching. At 3:17 a.m., I saw it. Not clearly, not enough to describe, but it was tall, taller than any man, lank and hunched like a scarecrow melted by snow. Its legs bent wrong. It didn't walk, it glided. Its eyes, if that's what they were, glinted like dull lanterns, not with light but hunger. It stood at the tree line for a long time just watching. Then it turned, vanished into the dark like mist curling from a dying fire. The next morning there was a note, scrawled in something dark and thick on a birch bark scrap. Just 2 words, fair trade. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't cook the next cut of meat. I locked the cabin door. I stared at the fire until the flames looked like mouths. Still, the gifts continued, and I, alone in that endless white world, began to wonder, what exactly was I trading? I buried the note behind the cabin in a shallow snowdrift, as if hiding it would make it less real. But the truth had already rooted itself in me. This wasn't just a pattern of animal behavior. It wasn't some wolf dragging kills toward human scent. This was a ritual, a message, a deal. The next time the meat arrived, I didn't touch it, left it to freeze on the porch. That night, the scratching came again, louder this time, more insistent. Something brushed across the side window just once, like a fingertip on frosted glass. I lit the stove higher and didn't dare close my eyes. For a few days, things went quiet. The meat stopped appearing. No sounds, no shadows, just the blanketing cold and the uneasy silence of a forest holding its breath. And then the snowshoe tracks showed up. They led from the northeast trail, one only rangers and smugglers used, and came straight to the station. They were erratic, uneven, like someone was limping or staggering. At the cabin's edge, they stopped. There was a long drag mark, a collapsed shape in the snow, and then the tracks veered away, back into the woods. I followed them only a few steps, just enough to be sure of what I was seeing. Someone had come to my cabin, and something had taken them. That night, I heard the voice for the first time. It came softly through the walls, garbled, hollow, like a recording that had been played too many times. Earl, it said my name, not shouted, not growled, whispered, with the same cadence my late wife used to call me in the mornings. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood up. I waited, not daring to respond. Again, a little louder. Earl, come outside. I didn't, but I did move to the window, and in the darkness between the trees, I saw her. It wasn't her, of course, too tall, too thin, skin like stretched wax and bones too long. But the face, it tried, it mimicked, as if it had studied a photograph of her and only half understood how to replicate it. I backed away, locked the cabin door, and lit every lamp I had. The wind outside began to rise, hissing through the seams of the station. The voice faded, replaced by low groaning sounds like trees breaking beneath snow. But there was no snap, no fall, just the sound of something pretending to be nature. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, the meat had returned. Only now, it wasn't venison. I couldn't say how I knew, but something about the color, the shape, the faint hint of wrongness in the muscle. I didn't touch it. I didn't even bring it inside. Just stood there, breathing into the cold, and stared at the offering. There was a second tooth, human again, molar. Still had a bit of root attached, and this time the birch bark note was longer. You keep the fire, I bring the feast. Don't ask what. That's when I started wondering how long this had been going on. Was I the first? The only? Had previous rangers made the same unspoken agreement, justifying it as survival? I dug out the old journals kept in the station. Most were water damaged or eaten by mice. But one from 1987 had a few intact pages. Ranger L. Dorsey. I didn't know him. But one entry caught my eye. Snow thick again. Woke up to meat. No tracks. Took it ilt? Maybe. Cabin fields watched. Last hiker passed 2 weeks ago. No sign since. Something knocking last night. Not woodpecker. There was no further mention. Just half a page torn out. The next morning I found something worse than meat. A parka. Half buried under snow 10 yards from the cabin. Still zipped. Stained dark across the front. When I unzipped it, there was nothing inside. No body. Just a mess of frozen slush and hair. But the name patch was intact. R. McLaren. A missing person from last fall, I remembered. Young guy, hiker. His flyer had been on the ranger station bulletin board before I came out. No one had ever found him. Until now, I reported it. Again, the radio spat static. My callouts vanished into the hum. The Wendigo, I had no doubt now that's what it was, wasn't just giving me food. It was showing me its power. It hunted on its own terms. And for some reason, it had chosen me as, what? A witness? A partner? A messenger? That night, the dreams began. They weren't mine. I saw through someone else's eyes, running through trees, ribs cracking with hunger, heart pounding with something more than fear, a need that hollowed the stomach and darkened the soul. When I woke, I was at the cabin door, barefoot, door unlocked, snow melting on my clothes. The note was under my hand, choose soon, or I choose. I burned the meat that morning. built a pyre with dry kindling, and threw the haunch straight into the flames. It hissed and spat, blackening like rubber. The stench, sweet, rotting, unmistakably wrong, turned my stomach. I retched into the snow. That night, no voice came, but I heard breathing outside the window. Long, slow. Not the breath of a predator, but of something that waits. I was running out of time. The Wendigo was growing bolder. Every night now, it circled closer. I no longer needed to open the door to feel its presence. It was inside the walls, or felt like it. Whispers came through the fireplace flue. Sometimes the voices were strangers. Sometimes they were people I had buried. One night, I dreamt I was back in my childhood home. My mother stood at the kitchen sink, humming, while something just out of view scratched at the screen door. I moved to open it, but she turned to me. Her eyes were clouded, blank. Her lips didn't move, but I heard her voice inside my head. You know what it wants. It just wants to be fed. I woke with a scream lodged in my throat, drenched in sweat, even though the room was freezing. The next morning, the snowstorm hit. It came like a wall. No warning, no soft buildup. Within hours, visibility dropped to zero. The world was white and howling. I had enough supplies for maybe a week if I rationed carefully, but the storm lasted longer than that. I lost track of how many days passed. Time became meaningless. I stayed inside, ate in silence, slept in fits. There were no more offerings, no more tracks, just cold and the dull thump of wind against the cabin walls. Then, on what I guess was the 8th day, I heard a knock. Not on the door, on the back wall. 3 short raps. I froze mid-bite, spoon hovering over a tin of beans. I didn't move. My breath clouded in the still air. Then again, 3 knocks, closer together. I stood, stepped to the back window and peeked through the frost. Nothing. But when I turned around, I found something waiting on the table. A thermos. Old green. One I hadn't seen in years. My father's. My legs nearly buckled. He'd taken it with him before his last assignment, before the stroke that ended his time in the Forest Service. He'd always said it was lucky, but when he died, the thermos was never found. And now it sat on my table, steaming. I didn't touch it, just stared. I couldn't. Eventually, I forced myself to sit and open it. The smell hit me like a punch. Coffee. Real, fresh brewed coffee. Hot too. Scalding when I dared to dip a finger. That's when I knew it had been inside. The Wendigo wasn't just watching anymore. It was walking the rooms with me, touching my things, rearranging my memories. And then, the hiker came. His name was Thomas. Mid-20s. Shivering, boots ruined, one glove missing. I found him collapsed outside the front step, curled in a tight ball. I dragged him in, got him by the stove, fed him broth. He warmed up slowly, blinking like a newborn. "What the hell is this place?" he whispered. I was trying to get to the trailhead. Then I heard someone calling me. My mom. I didn't say anything. He shook his head. She died 3 years ago. That's when the guilt returned. Hot, thick, coiled in my gut like a snake. He was bait, or maybe a test. Would I help him? Or would I let the Wendigo take him, as it had the last one? We shared a fire that night. He drifted off early, exhausted. I sat by the door, rifle on my lap, thinking, if I kept him inside, kept watch, maybe we'd both make it. But around 2 a.m., I nodded off. When I woke, the door was open. Snow drifted in over the threshold. Thomas was gone. I raced out, yelling his name. My voice vanished into the wind. I found tracks. They led around the side of the cabin, then vanished into a mess of prints that weren't human. Something had been on all fours, or maybe it had too many legs. I couldn't tell. That afternoon, the meat came back. It was cleaner this time, packed in tight bundles, wrapped in skin. I didn't open them. I didn't have to. I burned them again. That night, the Wendigo howled, not loud, not feral. It was low, mournful, almost disappointed. Then it spoke. Through the walls, it used Thomas's voice. "Why didn't you help me, Earl? Why'd you let me walk out there alone?" I jammed my hands to my ears, shouted, threw pans at the windows, but nothing stopped it. "You keep the fire, I bring the feast." It repeated the line again and again until my voice gave out from screaming back. When silence finally fell, I was crouched in a corner, shivering. The Wendigo wasn't just hungry. It was trying to teach me something, and maybe in its own broken logic, it thought it was being merciful. I understood now. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted me to join it. Waiting for continue. The storm broke the next morning. After what felt like weeks of white oblivion, the wind finally died, and the trees, those great frozen sentinels, stood motionless again. The sky was pale and empty, like the eye of something that had just blinked. I stepped outside, rifle across my back, and breathed in the brittle air. Every sound was amplified in the stillness. The snow creaked beneath my boots like old bones. Something had shifted. Not just in the landscape, but in me. That night I didn't bother locking the door. I didn't make a fire. I didn't eat. I sat in my chair watching the windows and waited. Just before midnight I heard it again. The scratching, slow, deliberate. Not at the door, but at the window panes, moving from one to the next. I refused to look. I just listened. Then a knock, on the front door this time. Not frantic, calm, 2 taps. I stood, opened it, and there he was, Thomas, or something wearing Thomas. He smiled, but the smile was wrong, stretched too wide, too still. "I forgot my thermos," he said. His voice was identical to the boy's, but there was no breath behind it, no warmth. He held up the green thermos in one clawed hand and stepped forward. I slammed the door and sat down. I knew then what the bargain really was. It had never been about peace. It had never been about survival. It was a trade, a long-standing agreement, older than any ranger station, older than the First Nation stories carved into bark and stone. Keep the fire lit, keep the cabin warm, and in return, it feeds elsewhere. I'd broken the chain. I had let 2 offerings go to waste, one by burning the meat, the other by trying to protect the hiker instead of presenting him. Now the Wendigo wanted compensation. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. The offering stopped completely, but I started seeing shapes out past the tree line. Tall ones, lanky, more than one, always still, always watching. When I approached, they vanished. I kept a journal then, tried to write it all down, not to warn anyone. No one would believe it. It was for me, to make sure I remembered what was real. But the problem was, the lines started to blur. Was it 3 hikers who had come, or just one? Had I eaten some of the meat once, early on? Why was the thermos on the table again? And whose voice was I hearing on the radio? My wife's? She'd been dead 10 years. One morning I woke to find boot prints circling the cabin. My own boots were wet. My rifle was missing. I had no memory of going outside. Then I found the envelope. It was tacked to the door with an old iron nail. Inside, a note in neat typewritten font. Open quote. "To whomever reads this, the man who lived here made a choice. He is not missing. He is accounted for. Please keep the fire lit. The forest thanks you." Close quote. I burned it. I burned everything. The journals, the meat, the bedding. I packed what I could, loaded the old snowmobile, and started down the only path that hadn't been buried in drifts. It was a narrow trail I didn't recognize. It seemed to know where I was going, even if I didn't. Hours passed. The sun never rose. At one point, I thought I saw a figure running alongside the trees, matching my speed, but it was too fast, too quiet. Its limbs moved like smoke. Then I found the outpost, a shack half buried in snow, far older than the ranger station. Ancient logs, tarred to weather the cold. Symbols carved into the doorframe, circles and slashes like warning signs. Inside, the walls were blackened from fire. Skulls were hung from the rafters, moose, wolf, maybe human. Bones lined the floor in neat spirals. There were chains bolted to the bed frame. I slept there anyway. I dreamed of the Wendigo's eyes, not glowing, just endless. Starless night in the shape of a face. It whispered not in words, but in need. And I finally understood. It didn't hate me. It didn't want revenge. It simply wanted me to last, to carry the pact forward, to remember the old ways when the snow came and the world forgot itself. The next morning, the trail was gone. So was the snowmobile. Only one thing remained at the foot of the bed, a fresh-cut haunch of meat, still warm. I didn't touch it, but I didn't burn it either. I left it where it lay and walked back toward the cabin. It wasn't home, but it was the only place left where my name still meant something. That night, the fire lit itself. The relief crew came 3 weeks later. 2 junior rangers, both young, fresh-faced, eager to prove themselves. I watched them from the tree line as they skidded up the old trail on snowmobiles, stopping where the ranger station should have been obvious. It had been covered by snowdrifts, but the smoke from the chimney must have drawn them in. I wanted to call out, but I didn't. They knocked. They called my name. They radioed base. No one answered. Eventually, they pried the door open. Inside, the fire had long gone cold. My uniform was folded neatly on the bunk, the name tag pinned perfectly. The badge was placed atop a sealed envelope, my resignation letter, typewritten, clean. I don't remember writing it, but it was my signature at the bottom. There was no blood, no signs of struggle, no sign of me at all. Just the cut of meat laid on a birchwood slab in the center of the room. They took samples, ran tests. It came back as venison, but not from any known species in the area. No one followed up. I stayed in the woods after that. I don't remember the first week. I don't remember being hungry or cold. But slowly, I found myself adjusting to the rhythm of the forest again. No need for clocks, no need for names. I learned to move silently, to watch without being seen. I'd come across hikers, some lost, some naive. Sometimes I helped them find their way back. Other times, well, the pact was never mine to break, but neither was it mine to keep alone. The Wendigo watched me still. Sometimes I heard it pacing outside where I slept, if you could call it sleep. It would mimic voices I'd nearly forgotten, my father's, my old captain's, sometimes my wife's. Earl, it would whisper, "You're doing so well." That's how it feeds, not just on flesh, but on memory, on the guilt of survival. I never stopped caring, but I stopped fighting. In early spring, I returned to the station, only briefly. I left a new axe, freshly sharpened, a stock pantry, maps marked in charcoal. A note on the desk, open quote, "Keep the fire lit. If something knocks, don't answer. If it speaks, don't listen. And if it offers peace, ask what it's asking in return." Close quote. I don't know who'll come next, but someone will. It always needs a keeper. And we always come willingly, thinking we're here to guard the forest, when really, the forest guards something far older, far hungrier. Concluding paragraph, 300 words. They say the Wendigo is a spirit of famine, a creature born when men consume one another in the cold. But I think that's only half of it. Hunger isn't just about flesh, it's about need. The need to belong, to endure, to matter. In the deep woods where the world forgets you, that need becomes something else. It becomes the pact. I no longer think of myself as Earl Whitman. That name belonged to a man who wanted to retire quietly, a man who believed the world was built on reason and laws and man-made lines on a map. But out here, there are older laws, ones that are enforced not by courts, but by wind and tooth and silence. I am what's left when those laws are obeyed long enough. There are nights I still recall the warmth of coffee, the sound of a human voice that wasn't an echo. But then I remember the gifts, the meat left neatly folded on the snowbank, the howls that weren't quite wolf, the footprints that always stopped just short of the door. And I know that silence is safer than sound. If someone ever finds this, or finds what I've become, I hope they understand it wasn't cowardice that kept me quiet. It was survival. The Wendigo doesn't take what it isn't given. Not at first. It waits, it offers, it bargains. And somewhere in all of us, there's always a part that says yes. We reached Lake Weinma just as the last light filtered through the frost-covered pines. Our RV rumbled along the narrow access road, tires crunching the remnants of last week's snowfall. Everything looked postcard perfect, snow-dusted evergreens, a still lake reflecting a pale sky, and not another soul in sight. That kind of quiet you only find way up north, near the Canadian border, where winter hangs on longer than it should. I was the one who'd planned the trip. Nate, the forever optimist, thinking a week off grid would do us good. Jenna had hesitated. She'd said something about not wanting to go so far off the map, but I convinced her. We needed this. Life back home was a blur of work and static, and lately our conversations had grown shallow and short. We made one last stop before turning off the highway, a small gas station with a flickering open sign and a front porch sagging under snow. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke and old vinyl. A bell jingled as we entered, and behind the counter stood a man who looked like he'd been carved from tree bark. "You folks headed to Weinma?" he asked, not looking up from the radio he was fiddling with. "That obvious?" I chuckled. He glanced at Jenna, then me, then the RV visible through the grimy window. "It's late in the season for campers. That place gets quiet come winter. Too quiet." Jenna gave me a look, the kind she used when she didn't want to argue, but also didn't want to be there. The man continued, "Just mind the woods at night. Cold ain't the only thing that'll bite you out there." I waited for the punchline. None came. "What do you mean?" I asked. He reached under the counter and pulled out a tin mug, his knuckles weathered and cracked. Wendigo, old legend, comes out when the ground freezes and the hunger runs deep. I grinned. Wendigo? That like Bigfoot's cousin? No, he said flatly. It's worse. Jenna excused herself and went back to the RV. I followed soon after, but not before the man muttered something else, barely audible. It mimics the ones you trust, then eats what's left. We drove the final hour in silence. Jenna stared out her window, watching snowflakes drift against the glass. I tried to shake the unease. Just a backwoods legend, something to spook city folks. Still, his tone lingered in my mind like smoke. We arrived at our campsite, a small clearing facing the lake's edge. There were no other RVs, no tents, just our vehicle surrounded by skeletal pines and the hush of wind over snow. I parked, killed the engine, and the silence fell like a blanket. We got to work unpacking. The generator buzzed to life, and I started a fire in the pit. Jenna pulled out her sketch pad. She was always drawing something, and curled up inside while I handled setup. After dinner, we stood by the fire, sipping cocoa from mismatched mugs. The flames danced across Jenna's face, and for the first time in weeks, she looked calm. This place is beautiful, she admitted, her voice soft. Told you, I said, nudging her shoulder. The trees around us creaked with the wind, and from the lake came a long, low groan, like the sound of ice shifting beneath the surface. I glanced toward the shoreline, but saw nothing. Later, as we crawled into the RV and shut the world out behind locked doors, I couldn't shake that last look the old man gave me, like he knew something we didn't, like he'd seen it before. Jenna drifted off quickly, her breath fogging the cold air. I stared at the ceiling, listening to the generator sputter and the fire outside die down. That night I dreamt of footsteps in snow, too many footsteps, all around the RV, and then whispering. By morning, the fire pit was nothing but blackened ash and bones of charred wood. Snow had fallen lightly during the night, leaving a powdery white layer over everything. I stepped out of the RV with a yawn, my boots crunching fresh snow, and was struck by how unnaturally still the forest had become. Not a bird call, not even the wind. Jenna joined me a few minutes later, wrapped in her wool coat and scarf. Her eyes looked heavy, like she hadn't slept well either. You were talking in your sleep, she said, blowing into her gloved hands. I raised an eyebrow. What did I say? She shrugged. Couldn't make it out, just mumbling, like you were whispering something over and over. I didn't remember dreaming anything at all. We made breakfast quietly, eggs and toast on the small propane stove, and tried to shake off the weird energy of the morning. Jenna returned to her sketchbook, huddled inside the RV, while I grabbed my camera and hiked a little way up the trail to get some shots of the lake. The trees seemed to crowd closer the farther I walked. The trail narrowed, and even though I knew I wasn't far from camp, the silence pressed in on me like something physical. I stopped when I reached the overlook. The lake stretched out below like a cracked mirror, the surface glazed with thin ice that reflected the pale gray sky. I snapped a few photos and was about to turn back when I noticed something strange along the shoreline, deep, wide tracks in the snow. I moved closer, careful not to slip down the slope. The prints were spaced far apart and much too large to be human. But they weren't bear prints either. No claws, no pads, just long, twisted impressions, like distorted footprints dragging unevenly across the bank. I crouched down, brushing snow away to reveal more. Whatever had made them had come out of the woods and walked directly toward the lake. But then, the trail just stopped. No return prints, no evidence of where it had gone, just vanishing into the ice. I stood up, heart beginning to race. A gust of wind rushed through the trees behind me, and for a moment I thought I heard it again, whispers, but not from around me, from below. I backed away, slowly at first, then faster as dread began to climb my spine. I returned to the RV to find Jenna standing by the open door, staring into the woods. Where were you? She asked, her voice shaky. Just taking photos, I said. She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on something in the trees. I followed her gaze. At first, I saw nothing. Then, deep in the forest, behind a tangle of bare branches, I saw movement. A figure too tall and too still to be human. It was watching us. I blinked and it was gone. We stayed inside for most of the day, keeping the heater running and the blinds drawn. Neither of us wanted to talk about what we'd seen, not yet. I tried to convince myself it had been a trick of the light or a tree swaying just right, but Jenna wasn't so sure. That night, we played music on the radio and read books, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. But neither of us could ignore the feeling that we weren't alone. Just after midnight, the generator sputtered and went out. The lights in the RV flickered, then died. We were suddenly plunged into pitch black silence. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the control panel. Nothing. I tried the ignition, dead. We weren't just without power, we were stranded. Then came the tapping. A soft rhythmic knock on the RV wall, just behind where Jenna sat. She froze. Another tap, then another, moving along the outside as if someone or something was circling us. I killed the flashlight and held my breath. That's when we heard it. A voice. It wasn't loud, but it was clear. "Let me in." I felt Jenna grip my arm, her nails digging into my skin. The voice came again, closer this time. "Please, it's so cold out here." It sounded like my voice. I stood up, barely breathing, and moved to the back window. Peering through the frosted glass, I saw a figure standing in the snow. It was me, or something that wore my face. It looked wrong, too tall. The skin pale and stretched, the mouth opened and closed mechanically, like it was rehearsing speech. Then it smiled, and the skin cracked. I staggered back, slamming the curtain shut. "What did you see?" Jenna whispered. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The voice outside kept calling. Sometimes it sounded like me, sometimes like Jenna, sometimes like neither. But it always said the same thing: "Let me in." We didn't sleep that night. We sat together, backs against the locked door, listening to the cold thing outside mimic us. Just before dawn, the voices stopped. When I stepped outside at first light, the snow around the RV was covered in footprints, ours and others, twisted, elongated, some leading away into the forest, but some circling. Jenna didn't want to stay another night. I didn't blame her. The moment the morning light touched the treetops, she was packing our gear in frantic silence, her eyes flicking toward the woods like she expected something to crawl out of them at any moment. I tried the ignition again, more out of routine than hope. Nothing. The RV was dead. "We'll hike to town," I said, trying to sound calm. "There's a ranger station marked on the map, maybe 4 miles southeast." She just nodded, but her lips were pale. She hadn't spoken a word since I told her what I'd seen last night. We loaded our essentials into our day packs and locked the RV behind us, as if that could keep anything out. I left a note on the dashboard with the date and time, just in case. The woods had changed overnight. Everything felt closer. The snow muffled our steps, but the silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was oppressive. Every few hundred feet, one of us would glance behind, certain we were being followed. The map was accurate, but the trail twisted more than we expected, winding through thick pines and dense undergrowth. Our pace slowed. The light began to dim, though the sun was still above us. "I feel like we're being funneled," Jenna whispered at one point, voice barely audible. I did too. The trees, thick and dark, seemed to draw us in one direction, regardless of what the map said. Several times we had to backtrack Hual, only to find that the trail we just walked was different, like the forest was reshaping itself behind us. Around midday, we found the signal tower, at least what remained of it. A rusted structure, bent and twisted as though something massive had torn through it. The metal was warped in unnatural ways. No storm had done this. The radio box at the base was smashed open, wires dangling like entrails. I stared at it for a while before realizing Jenna was no longer beside me. I called her name, once, twice. A faint reply, "Here," echoed from the trees. I ran toward the voice, heart hammering, but stopped short when I heard it again. "Here," only this time it was my voice. I froze. The air grew cold, denser somehow. My breath fogged instantly. And then I saw her, Jenna, standing perfectly still among the trees, maybe 20 feet ahead. "Don't move," I said, stepping closer. She didn't blink, didn't even react. Her face was slack, pale. Her arms hung loose by her side. That's when another voice, Jenna's voice, came from behind me. "Don't trust it." I spun. There she was, the real Jenna, panting, her coat torn and branches in her hair. The other Jenna smiled. The skin at the corner of her mouth split, as if it had been stretched too tightly over a frame it didn't quite fit. She took a step forward, and the woods suddenly erupted with sound, a low guttural growl, deep and bone-rattling. The thing in Jenna's shape dropped to all fours and bounded into the trees, disappearing faster than I could react. We didn't talk. We ran. By the time we found the ranger station, night was creeping in again. It was an old, windowless outpost built of timber and steel, its satellite dish crooked but still intact. No lights, no sign of anyone. Inside, it smelled like mold and stale coffee. But there was a working shortwave radio. I spent 10 minutes adjusting the frequencies while trying not to panic before I finally got a weak connection. A man's voice answered, local sheriff. I told him our coordinates, what had happened. I left out the creature. I just said we were stranded. He said he'd send someone by sunrise. That night, we barricaded the doors with desks and chairs. There were thick bars on the single window. The wood stove still worked, and we kept it blazing. But the warmth didn't stop the dread from returning. Just after midnight, the knocking began, soft at first, then louder. A rhythmic tap on the wooden wall, then a scratch, then silence. We didn't move, we didn't speak, and then the voice returned. Let me in. It wasn't even trying to be us anymore. It had learned the pattern, the tone, but not the meaning. The words came out jumbled, distorted, like a bird repeating a phrase it didn't understand. Let me in, I'm ya friend. It went on like that for hours. We didn't sleep. Around 3 a.m., something heavy slammed against the wall. The structure shuddered. Jenna screamed. We pressed our backs to the door as it rattled in its frame. Then everything stopped. Silence again. We waited until dawn. Not that we could see the sun, just a faint shift in the darkness. The sheriff arrived just before 7. He didn't believe our story. Who would? The RV was found, door ripped open, claw marks along the frame. Inside, untouched, except for dozens of footprints circling in the snow outside. But here's the part that chills me even now. The sheriff asked if either of us had lost something personal. Jenna said yes, her grandmother's silver bracelet. It had been missing since our second night. He handed it to her, said it had been found hanging from a tree branch, 10 feet off the ground. There were no other prints leading to it, just the clawed ones. Walking upright. Word count. Sleep had become impossible. Even back home, weeks later, I kept hearing that voice at the edge of my consciousness. The distorted mimicry, the cadence of something trying to sound almost human. Jenna wasn't doing much better. She moved back in with her parents, stopped answering most calls. The bracelet, the one returned to her, now sat in a sealed box in her closet. She said she couldn't even look at it without feeling sick. I tried to forget, to rationalize. Maybe it was just a bear. Maybe the exhaustion had made us hallucinate. But deep down, I knew we had encountered something that had no place in the world as we understood it. And the worst part, I didn't think it was over. About a month later, I got a letter. Handwritten, no return address, just a postmark from a small town near Higgins Lake. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. On it, scribbled in jagged handwriting, "Don't go back. It knows you're sent now." I thought about calling Jenna, but I didn't. Instead, I buried the letter in the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath tax forms and unread manuals. Then the signals started again. I work in environmental monitoring, and part of my job involves keeping an eye on satellite telemetry and remote wildlife sensors. One of our units, located hundreds of miles from Higgins Lake, began broadcasting irregular bursts of data. Nothing dangerous, just odd. Intermittent pulses at odd hours. At first, I dismissed it as a hardware fault, but one of my colleagues, a guy named Harris, decided to review the raw data out of curiosity. "Hey," he said one morning, wheeling his chair over to my desk, "you've got to see this." He brought up the infrared logs. Bursts of movement, always at the same time, between 2:43 and 2:47 a.m. for 3 nights in a row. It wasn't the motion that concerned me. It was the heat signature, man-shaped, upright, but wrong. The proportions didn't match. Limbs too long, core temperature too low. And each time, just before the image flickered out, the figure would stop directly in front of the sensor and stare. We disabled the unit that day, blaming faulty calibration. Harris laughed it off, but I couldn't, not after what I saw next. That night, I went through archived security footage from the ranger station where we'd taken shelter during the Wendigo incident. I hadn't been able to bring myself to look at it before, but now I had to know. There was only one camera, a grainy low-light feed pointed toward the entrance. For the first few hours, nothing but darkness. Then around 1:30 a.m., Something moved at the edge of the frame. I leaned in, adjusted the contrast. It stepped into view slowly. Tall, thin, and it crawled on two legs, not walked, crawled. Its knees bent at odd angles, limbs jerking in unnatural ways. It stopped just outside the light range, where its features were barely visible. Then it spoke. There was no audio, but the time code aligned with when Jenna and I had heard the knocking in the voice. The thing cocked its head, opened its mouth, and stood completely still, like it wanted to be seen mimicking. Then suddenly it leapt, straight at the camera. The footage ended in static. I shut my laptop. My skin was ice. Jenna called that night, for the first time in weeks. Her voice was shaking. "I saw it," she said. "Outside my window. It was wearing my face." The next few days were chaos. Jenna packed up and left for Colorado. I took a leave of absence from work. But no matter how far we went, we couldn't shake the feeling that something was following. The sightings continued, not of the creature itself, but of signs. Deep scratch marks on door frames, the sound of someone knocking in threes. Strange arrangements of sticks and rocks outside tents, cabins, and even suburban homes. The worst was the audio message left on my voicemail one morning. It started with static, then a voice, my own, saying, "You shouldn't have listened. You broke the silence." And then laughter. Not mine. I needed answers. I drove back up north, retracing our original route to Higgins Lake. It was reckless, but I couldn't live with the fear anymore. I stopped at the same gas station where we'd first heard the stories. The woman behind the counter wasn't the same, but when I mentioned the Wendigo, she froze. "You should leave that thing alone," she muttered. "It remembers." I asked her what she meant. She leaned in, eyes wide. "They don't forget faces. Not like us. You didn't just see it, you made contact. That's a bond, and bonds don't break. Not with them." "Them?" I asked. But she just shook her head. "Not my story to tell. Go ask the one they call Burroughs. He lives in a shack east of the lake. If he's still breathing." It took hours to find him. The shack was hidden deep in the pines, a collapsing structure overrun by moss and time. The man who answered the door looked like he hadn't seen another soul in years. "I figured someone come eventually," he rasped. "You're not the first to hear it whisper, and you won't be the last." I told him everything, about the RV, the mimicry, the signal, Jenna's calls. He nodded slowly. "They don't like being noticed," he said. "For generations we stayed quiet, offered meat, stayed out of the trees at night. But every time someone tries to reach back, tries to understand, speak, record, they take it as challenge, a crack in the old pact." "But what is it?" I asked. Burroughs looked at me then, and for the first time, I saw real fear in the eyes of someone who had already lost everything. "It was never human," he said. "Not even close. It's the voice between branches, the shadow that waits when you blink. We call it Wendigo because we have no better name, but it's older than the word, older than us." He gave me one last piece of advice before I left. Never answer when it calls you in your own voice. That night I slept in my car, locked, engine running. Just before sunrise, I woke up to the sound of tapping 3 times, then silence. I didn't look outside, I just drove. When you've seen it, you can't unsee it. It's not like a bear sighting or a coyote crossing the road. Those experiences fade. What happened to us, what I brought back from Higgins Lake, etched itself into my nervous system like acid on stone. And even though I had left the forest, it never really left me. I moved into a small studio apartment in a city hours away from any natural reserve. The walls were thick, neighbors loud, and the nearest tree was a dying ornamental sapling. I thought I'd be safe in the chaos of city noise and crowds. But fear doesn't respect geography. It started small. My phone would light up at 2:47 a.m. each night. No calls, no messages, just the screen lighting up. Once it showed a location ping in a wooded area back in Michigan, an impossible result since I hadn't been anywhere near the place in weeks. I disabled location services, removed all smart devices. Still, the pings continued. Then came the dream. Or at least, I thought it was a dream. I was back in the forest, standing beside the broken down RV, and Jenna was calling to me from within the trees. Except it wasn't her voice. It was close, but had a warped, gurgling undertone as if filtered through a cracked throat. I turned toward the sound and saw 2 glowing eyes hovering far too high off the ground. Then came a sound, like ribs snapping underwater. The thing began to crawl toward me on elbows and knees, whispering my name in reverse. I woke up gasping for breath, drenched in sweat, my fingernails dug into the side of the mattress. The worst part? There were 3 long scratches on the inside of my apartment door. From the inside. I tried to tell myself I was cracking up. I booked sessions with a therapist. I was prescribed medication, told it was trauma, hallucinations, unresolved survivor's guilt, until I found them. Online, buried deep in a thread titled Voices in the Pines, were stories, first person, dated as far back as the 1990s, all centered around Higgins Lake or the forests surrounding it. Similar details, always campers, always something mimicking voices in the night, and always 3 knocks. One user stood out, Old Pine Watcher. Their posts were detailed, methodical, less like a campfire tale and more like a field report. I messaged them desperate. They replied, "You let it hear your voice. That's how it chooses." We exchanged messages for days. I asked what it wanted, why it followed, whether there was a way to break the connection. They said no. It's not a predator. It's a mirror. It shows you your fear, your voice, your past. If you fled from something before, it becomes that. You didn't meet a Wendigo. You met your Wendigo. That phrase, your Wendigo, stuck with me. I asked if I should go back, to apologize, offer food, try to honor whatever pact I had broken. The response came 3 hours later. Going back means you accept it. The only way to survive is to never answer, not even in your thoughts, because it learns through recognition. Forget it exists, or it becomes you. Then Old Pine Watcher deleted their account. I threw myself into normalcy, day job, errands, pointless hobbies. But everything felt off. Crowds gave me anxiety. Mirrors made me sick. Every night at 2:47, the hallway light outside my door flickered. Then came the final confirmation, something I could no longer rationalize. One night, while cleaning old audio files from my phone's recorder app, I stumbled upon a file I hadn't made, dated the day after our escape from Higgins Lake. The title simply read, Record 247. I played it. At first, just static. Then my own voice, whispering, "Don't leave me." It repeated, same cadence, same rhythm, but each time it grew more distorted, more frantic, until the last whisper broke into a shriek. And underneath it all, a second voice, low, rattling, muttering something unintelligible, but with intent. I could hear the breath behind it. The hunger. I dropped the phone. By morning, the file was gone. I contacted Jenna one last time. We met in a diner on the edge of town. She looked thinner, hollowed, the same kind of fear I saw in the mirror every morning. "I can't sleep anymore," she said. "It knocks on my window now. I live on the 15th floor." She showed me her arm, 3 long bruises, almost like finger marks. It's like it's testing how close it can get. I told her everything. The file, the scratches, the online warnings. She nodded, slowly, then leaned in, whispering like a secret would save us. "I've been having a recurring dream," she said. "We're back at the lake, but this time we don't escape. The RV never starts. And the thing walks into camp wearing your face, and I let it in because I think it's you." I didn't know what to say, but I understood. The Wendigo isn't about hunger, it's about replacement. It doesn't kill you, it becomes you. Jenna left town the next day. I haven't heard from her since, and last night I saw myself standing outside my building just beyond the streetlight. It wasn't a reflection, it was watching me, and then it smiled. Sometimes silence is the loudest warning. After everything, I've come to understand that true horror doesn't end with a scream. It lingers in your life like smoke, saturating your clothes, clinging to your lungs, never quite fading. The Wendigo, or whatever form that thing took, had done more than chase us from Higgins Lake. It had followed, embedded itself in the corners of our perception, and rewritten how we interacted with the world. The scariest part? It didn't need to show itself anymore. It had already won. In the weeks after Jenna disappeared, I tried to go completely off-grid. I canceled all online accounts, switched to a flip phone, moved to a rundown 1-bedroom rental in the middle of a concrete jungle. The logic was that creatures like it couldn't thrive in places like this, where nothing grew, where there were no woods to echo voices, no dark trails to mimic footsteps. But the rules I thought I understood didn't apply anymore. One night, the power cut out. I lit a candle and sat on the floor, trying to distract myself with an old book. That's when the knocking began, 3 short raps, like always, but not from the door this time. It was from inside the apartment, from the closet I hadn't opened since moving in. I stood there, hand trembling near the knob, and remembered the warning from old Pine Watcher: never answer, not even in your thoughts. But here's the thing, they weren't my thoughts anymore. Somewhere along the way, it had begun slipping in. I'd think about checking my locks, and I'd hear it say, I already did. I'd go to bed and think, I hope it's gone, and something inside me would whisper back, I never left. The worst of it wasn't hearing it in the dark, it was hearing it while looking in the mirror. One morning, I woke up with mud on my feet. Fresh pine needles were on my bedsheet. I hadn't left the apartment. Or maybe I had, and just didn't remember. That same day, I received a package, no return address. Inside was a small, polished stone carved with strange lines, almost like a totem. I recognized the shape. It was nearly identical to one of the objects I'd seen in those camera photos we retrieved from the broken thermal trap at Higgins. It was a gift, or a mark. I smashed it with a hammer and threw the pieces into a storm drain. That night, the dreams returned, stronger, clearer. This time, I was running through the forest, but the perspective wasn't mine. I was watching from above, like through heat-sensitive eyes. The figure stumbling through the woods below me was me, gasping, lost, hopeless. And the thing hunting me wasn't angry, it was curious, studying, learning. Each time it saw me fear, it repeated that action, mimicked my hesitation, took on my form. By the end of the dream, we were both standing in front of each other, me and it. And when I screamed, it didn't run. It screamed back, perfectly. I tried telling myself again it wasn't real, but the scratches returned, on the ceiling this time. Long, sweeping arcs like claws or fingers dragged through the plaster above my bed. No one else in the building heard it. Maintenance blamed old pipes, but I knew better. This wasn't about the forest anymore. It wasn't about the Wendigo itself. It was about the connection. I had acknowledged it, fled from it, fought it, but in doing so, I'd become part of its ritual, its game. It mimics the prey, learns the scent, the voice, the fear, and waits. Not to pounce, to become. It didn't want me dead. It wanted me erased. I found one final message in a hidden folder on an old flash drive I hadn't used in years. Inside were images, some corrupted, some vivid, from our original Higgins Lake trip. But among them was a video clip I never recorded. It showed my RV, intact, normal, early dusk. Then the camera jolted, moved like it was mounted on a shoulder. Through the trees, it zoomed in. I stepped out of the RV, but the angle, the breathing, the blinking, it was filmed from something else's perspective. I was being watched before anything happened, before we even knew it existed. Now I no longer sleep more than a few hours at a time. My windows stay shut, the locks double-checked, the mirrors covered. But deep down, I know it's too late. Because some nights, I wake up standing in the hallway, my mouth open mid-whisper, and the words I say, they're not mine. They're not human. I spent the last 2 years building an audience on YouTube by pushing myself further off the grid than anyone else dared. No GPS, no heat packs, no backup radios, just me, my cameras, and a challenge. The series was called Survival Outside the Map. Fans loved the isolation, the rawness. They called me fearless. Some said reckless. I preferred disciplined. For my next big upload, I chose the Kabatagama State Forest, northern Minnesota. In early February, no one in their right mind camped solo there in that kind of cold, which of course was the whole point. I had planned a 5-day zero support challenge, no tent heater, no modern gear aside from my solar-powered camera rig. Everything else was bushcraft. Fire, shelter, food, the basics from scratch. I posted the teaser with a bold caption, 0 degrees, 0 help, 1 man. My subscribers ate it up. On day 1, I parked on a gravel shoulder beside a snow-covered service road and hiked in until the signal vanished. That was the rule. If my phone pinged even once, I hadn't gone far enough. The forest swallowed me within an hour. Pines grew in thick, uneven rows, and snow hung off branches like drenched cotton. By late afternoon, I found a spot that felt right. Dense trees to block the wind, a slight rise for drainage. I cut branches for bedding and stacked snow for walls. That night, huddled in my bivy sack beside a slow-burning pine fire, I talked to the lens like I always did, half narration, half confession. No backup plan, I said to the camera. No tricks. If I don't get this shelter right, I'll freeze by sunrise. I didn't mention the stillness yet. How, even for deep forests, the silence felt off. No owls, no wind through branches, just the hiss of snow melting near flame. By the second night, the cold thickened into something else, heavier, like breathing through cloth. I stayed close to the fire, refueling it with bark and pine cones. At around 3 a.m., the audio on my lapel mic spiked. Static. Then, a sound. Not loud, but unmistakable. Someone whispered my name, Mason. Not yelled, not moaned, just spoken, with clarity, familiar, like someone standing just outside the reach of the firelight. I froze, listening. My first thought wasn't ghosts or monsters, it was real-world danger. Someone had followed me in, maybe to rob me, maybe worse. But there were no footprints in the fresh snow the next morning. I rewound the camera footage. There it was again, barely above the ambient noise. My name, but nothing moved. No eyes reflected back, no outline in the trees. I didn't tell my audience, not yet. Instead, I brushed it off in the next day's log. Bit of cabin fever setting in, I said to the camera. I swear I heard something last night. Trees settling, maybe. Then I moved on, showing how to boil water from snow using coals and bark. But that night, it happened again. This time, the voice said something else. Mason, come here. Still calm, still familiar. But I knew that voice. I just couldn't place it. I called out, shining my headlamp across the woods. Nothing moved, not even branches. But when I turned back, I noticed it. Footprints, 2 of them, deep impressions in the snow just beside my camp. They weren't mine. Too wide apart, too long, and barefoot, in sub-zero cold. They led nowhere, not toward camp, not away, just there. I set up one of my solar trail cams facing the tree line, another aimed at the clearing. If someone was out there, I'd catch them. That night, I barely slept. Something scraped the snow outside my shelter. Not pacing, not storming, just circling. And then, Mason, the voice said again. I recognized it now. It wasn't just familiar, it was personal. It was my brother's voice, Owen, dead 2 years now. Car crash, fast and cruel. He used to tease me with that exact tone when we were kids. Whisper my name from the hallway just to get under my skin. I turned the camera on and whispered, I think someone's mimicking my brother. I didn't even care how that sounded anymore. In my gut, I knew this wasn't a person playing games. The wind picked up that night, but the fire refused to stay lit. My flint strikers snapped from the cold. I burned most of my spare socks just to get a few hours of warmth. And all through the night, the forest hummed, low, rhythmic. Not mechanical, organic, alive. The next morning, the trail cams were dead, fully drained. The batteries weren't old. They were designed for long-range wildlife recording, solar-backed, rugged, but all of them were dark, dead screens, blank. Something had been watching me, and now it didn't care if I knew. On the morning of day 3, I found something I hadn't seen the day before. A piece of bark jammed into a split tree trunk about chest high. It hadn't fallen there naturally. The edges were clean, and someone or something had carved 3 long vertical gouges into it, like claws or blades dragged across it deliberately. I filmed it in silence, my breath puffed visible in the air. I didn't narrate, didn't crack a joke. Something about it felt ceremonial, like I'd stumbled into a place where I wasn't meant to be. The snow had turned heavier, and my legs ached from breaking trail. I tried to rationalize. Maybe someone else had camped here weeks ago. A hunter, a hiker. But this forest didn't get many visitors in winter. That was part of the reason I chose it. Back at camp, I checked my remaining batteries. The cold had sapped almost everything. The backup camera still had some juice, and I decided I'd keep it on a tripod through the night, aimed at my shelter. If anything came close again, I'd catch it. As the sun dropped behind the pines, a purple haze settled over the snow. I bundled myself tighter into my sleeping bag, fed the fire, and waited. That night, the whisper came earlier and clearer. Mason, it said again, just beyond the tree line. It's cold out here. Let me in. That was Owen's voice. Exactly. It wasn't just the sound. It was the rhythm, the little stutter he used to have when he was nervous. But Owen had never been here. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering. It wasn't just fear, it was confusion, sadness. This thing, whatever it was using him. Digging into the one place I kept guarded. My mind raced with half-remembered warnings. There were stories, rumors I'd come across in old forums and interviews. Videos flagged and taken down. People who went missing in northern forests after hearing familiar voices calling to them. A user once wrote, "Never answer when the woods know your name." I hadn't understood it until now. I stayed in my shelter, whispering into my camera, documenting everything. But then the voice changed. It wasn't Owen anymore. Now it was my mother, soft, warm, the way she used to wake me for school. "Mason, sweetheart, are you hurt?" My throat tightened. I wanted to yell at it, tell it to stop. Instead, I said nothing. The snow outside shifted. Something brushed against the side of my shelter, not hard, not clumsy, just enough to be a reminder. I grabbed my small hatchet and crouched low, watching the dark edges of the shelter flicker with firelight. It never tried to come in, but it stayed, breathing, whispering, all night. When I finally drifted off, it was nearly dawn. The fire had long gone out. I woke to the cold, bone deep, and silence, the kind that settles after something has left or is waiting. I checked the camera. The lens had been shattered, not broken in a fall, but crushed inward as if something had pressed a finger into it. That same day, I made a decision. I would hike out early. I had footage, more than enough. I didn't care if people accused me of faking it. I just wanted out. I packed light and left most of my setup. The camera bag, the tripod, even my hammock tarp. I followed my inbound trail using GPS markers I'd mapped manually the first day. But an hour in, the signal glitched, then vanished. My compass spun. No joke. The needle rotated slow and steady, like it had forgotten where north was. I turned around. There was no trail behind me, only snow, unbroken, like I hadn't walked at all. I turned the camera on and said what I hadn't dared to say aloud until then. I think something is controlling where I go. I didn't even recognize my own voice in the playback. That night, I set no fire, no warmth, no talking. I sat beneath a bent pine, hatchet in hand, and waited. And again, the voice came. This time, it wasn't alone. It was multiple voices, interwoven, layered. Owen, my mother, a childhood friend who died in high school, even my own voice, repeating phrases I'd said on camera in past videos. They laughed. They repeated back pieces of my life like a child playing dress-up. Except this wasn't innocent. It was calculated. And then from the woods, a shape, tall, gaunt, shoulders arched forward unnaturally, as if the thing had grown too fast and hadn't learned how to carry itself. It stood still, watching, not hiding anymore. I could feel it mimicking my breath, matching it rhythm for rhythm. I blinked. It was gone. Not vanished, just absorbed, back into the trees, like it had never been there. I didn't sleep that night. When dawn came, I tried once again to follow the GPS track. I ignored the compass, just moved toward where the sun should be rising, east. But by midday, I was right back at the campfire ring I'd left behind. Fresh prints beside it, barefoot, elongated, inhuman. They circled twice, then stopped directly where I'd sat the night before. The Wendigo wasn't just toying with me. It was studying, learning. And now, it sounded exactly like everyone I'd ever trusted. By the time the sun dipped again, my face was cracked from the wind, and my thoughts were fraying at the edges. I couldn't remember if it was day 4 or 5. Time seemed to have folded in on itself, like the trees were rearranging behind me when I wasn't looking. My last battery died before nightfall. No more filming, no more flashlight, just me and the forest. There was an old trapper's shack I remembered passing on my first day, a sagging frame of logs wedged between 2 leaning trees. I hadn't bothered investigating then. It felt wrong, like it didn't want to be noticed. But now, it was my only option for shelter. I followed the trail I thought would lead me there, only to find it standing before me 20 minutes later, as if it had moved closer while I wasn't looking. Inside, it stank of mold and dust. Animal bones were scattered near the fireplace, rodents mostly, and a cracked antler. The walls had dozens of scratches etched into them, counting tallies. Hundreds of them. I brushed away frost from the small table by the window and found a notebook curled with age. The pages crumbled at the edges, but most of the writing was still legible. A man's journal, judging by the scrawl, and it didn't take long to realize he'd seen it too. His entries started normally, reports of game caught, snowfall levels, weather, but within a week they changed. Mentions of strange cries at night, of voices repeating things from his childhood, of being followed by something with no shadow. The last few entries were nearly illegible, lines written over each other again and again. But one page was clear, centered in the middle. The Wendigo doesn't hunt, it waits, it learns you, and then it becomes you. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again, slow, thick flakes that swallowed sound. I built a small fire in the hearth using torn pages from the journal, trying to conserve what dry kindling I had left. The warmth didn't last long. Just after nightfall, I heard it again. Only this time it wasn't at a distance. It was inside the shack. "Hey, buddy." I spun toward the voice, blood turning to ice. That was Owen. Not just his voice, but his tone. How he used to talk to me when we were kids after I'd scraped my knee or broken a toy. "Don't be scared." I knew it wasn't him, but part of me wanted to believe. I crouched, hand on my hatchet, and backed slowly toward the door. The fire flickered low, barely illuminating the far corner of the room. That's where I saw it. A shape just barely wrong enough not to be human. Too thin, too tall, legs too long, no light hit its face. But it moved when I moved. It was mimicking my posture. I bolted into the night. Snow slammed into my face as I ran blindly through the dark woods, heart screaming in my chest. Branches clawed at me. Roots tried to trip me. Behind me, the voices multiplied, not echoing, but repeating. Everything I'd said aloud in the past few days, all my video intros, my quiet mutterings when I was afraid. My name, over and over. I screamed once, not out of fear, but frustration. "What do you want?" And from the woods came a perfect echo. "What do you want?" Then, in Owen's voice again, "Don't leave me." Then my mother's, "Come back, honey." I collapsed in a drift and covered my ears. It didn't help. The voices weren't just around me, they were inside me now. I stayed like that until I passed out from cold or exhaustion. I don't know which. When I woke, the world was still, too still. My limbs hurt, my lips were cracked, but I wasn't dead. I opened my eyes and saw bare branches above me, black against a pale sky. Morning. I staggered back toward the shack, but it wasn't there anymore. Instead, I found the fire ring from my original camp, ashes still faintly warm. I'd gone nowhere. The trees had twisted me in circles. That day, I didn't try to escape. I didn't film, didn't talk. I just waited. And as night fell, I made a new fire and sat with my back to a tree, hatchet in hand, listening. The Wendigo didn't speak that night. It sang. A lullaby my mother used to hum when I was sick. Soft, gentle, sorrowful. That was the worst part. It wasn't threatening anymore. It was comforting. As if it knew, truly knew what I'd lost, who I missed, what I feared. It wasn't trying to kill me. It was trying to replace me. And for a brief moment, huddled in the snow, I understood. The Wendigo wasn't just a monster. It was a memory, one that fed on other people's. It devoured stories, voices, thoughts, and then wore them like a second skin. And I was giving it everything it needed. For I tried to sleep, but the moment my eyelids shut, I felt it brushing the edge of my thoughts, like a spider inching toward the center of its web. The Wendigo didn't need to attack. It just needed time. Cold, silence, and loneliness were doing the work for it. At sunrise, I walked, not in a direction, just away from the fire pit. North, I thought, maybe northeast. I had no compass, no sun, no path. The snow blurred everything. I passed the same twisted birch tree 4 times that morning. At first, I told myself I was disoriented, that it was just coincidence. But when I stopped at the base of that tree the 4th time and saw a crude symbol etched in the bark, a spidery W that hadn't been there before, I knew it was leading me, hurting me. I kept going. A few hours later, I found the ranger outpost. It was buried in snow up to the windows, but the green roof peeked through, and the front door had been broken off its hinges, half collapsed, but not useless. Inside, it was warmer than I expected, sheltered from the wind with broken chairs, a rusted stove, and a coat rack still holding a parka stiff with age. There was another journal in a drawer, bound in leather. The pages were damp, but I could read most of it. This one was older, maybe from the 1960s. Not a trapper this time, but a ranger. His name was carved into the inside cover, E. Larson. Larson had written something I'd never heard before. The Wendigo, he wrote, is not a predator of the body. It consumes memory, identity. It uses the cold to make you forget, to empty you out, so it can take your place unnoticed. He described campers who wandered into the woods and were found days later, quiet, pale, refusing to speak. Some were never found. Others returned to their families, and yet didn't. Look into their eyes, Larson wrote, and you'll know. The person you loved is gone, and something else is just wearing their name. I flipped ahead to the last page. There was a drawing, done in pencil, shaky and thin. A man's figure, but stretched unnaturally. Eyes sunken. Antlers protruding, but not like a deer's, like branches that grew from the skull. Underneath it, one final line. It doesn't live here. It waits here. Because this place forgets things. That night, I didn't make a fire. I sat against the wall of the outpost, wrapped in the old ranger's parka, staring at the dark window. It was like staring into a frozen mirror. It came again just after midnight. "Hey, Mason," my brother's voice again. I didn't move. "You're okay. Just follow me. I know the way out." I stayed still. Then came my own voice, clear, unmistakable, like it had been copied from one of my videos. "Hey folks, it's Mason Hill coming to you from..." I slammed my fist into the table. "Stop it." Silence. Then came the softest whisper, a woman's voice, barely audible. "Mason, I'm proud of you." My mother, or what used to be her. The tears came before I could stop them. She had died when I was 16. A car accident. There were no goodbyes. Hearing her now, just her voice, was like bleeding from an old wound I didn't know I still had. And that's when I understood. It didn't need strength or claws or fangs. It just needed you to want something back. Someone, some piece of yourself that you lost. That ache became the entry point. I turned my back to the window and whispered to the air, "You're not real." The wind outside groaned low. "You don't know me," I said louder. "You just wear me." From the dark came one last voice, not my brother's, not my mother's. It was my own, but changed, like it had learned how to feel something. "You don't remember what it feels like to be alone." I stood up, shouldered my pack, and kicked open the door. Snowflakes spiraled sideways in the wind, but in the distance, faintly through the storm, I saw the red stripe of a trail marker, old but clear, the Appalachian Trail reroute. I'd marked it weeks ago on my offline map, planning for a future trip. I started walking. Behind me, the voices didn't follow. They just watched. I could feel it, the presence pulling away, but not retreating, just waiting. I walked until dawn, until I saw the forest break and the faint silhouette of a fire watchtower in the distance. Salvation, maybe. But even as I stepped onto the gravel base of the tower and radioed for help, voice shaking, teeth chattering, I felt something still lingering inside me. Not a voice, not a memory, just an echo. They found me 2 days later, wrapped in a thermal blanket under the fire tower. I was half frozen, barely conscious, muttering fragments of names that didn't match any on my emergency contact list. The search and rescue team said my eyes looked vacant, like I hadn't slept in weeks. But what unnerved them most was the footage. My GoPro, miraculously undamaged despite the snow and cold, had been recording almost the entire time. The last video file had auto-uploaded once I hit a signal range near the fire tower. It showed me sitting alone in the outpost, staring at the camera, and then speaking. Only, it wasn't really me. My voice was distorted, slightly delayed, slightly too even, like something had learned how to speak from watching but hadn't yet figured out why humans inflect emotion. I said things I don't remember saying, lines that chilled me when I watched it later. Being alone isn't frightening, it's freeing. No one remembers the old voices, so I'll wear new ones. At one point, I leaned toward the lens. Close, too close. The whites of my eyes were pale and glassy. "Thank you for teaching me what it means to be." That file went viral, of course. The story became one of those creepy real-life uploads that Reddit picked up and twisted into conspiracy. The Wendigo theory started right away, people saying it was all staged, some new immersive ARG. Others claimed I was experiencing a psychotic break. One guy even claimed I'd been possessed by a cold-weather spirit he'd once read about on a cryptid forum. But none of them were right, and none of them were wrong either. I spent 6 weeks recovering in a Minneapolis hospital. They ran blood tests, psych evaluations, MRIs. Everything came back clean. Too clean. I should have had frostbite, hypothermia, some kind of trauma from starvation. But I didn't. It was like I'd been kept just warm enough, just fed enough to stay functional, to survive. I moved to Arizona after that. No more forests, no more winter. I deleted my channel, sold the camera gear. I even burned the leather journal I took from the Ranger's outpost, though I regret that now. Not because it had answers, but because sometimes I need to remember that I didn't imagine it, because things have started to happen again. Nothing dramatic, nothing monstrous. Just little things. A knock at my front door with no one there. My voice calling out from another room. A neighbor telling me they saw my brother leaving the house when he's been dead for over 10 years. Sometimes I find strange footprints in the dust on my porch, elongated, deep, like something heavy and tall had been standing there, waiting. But the scariest part isn't that it's followed me. It's that I might have brought it here. Technology has a way of making things eternal. We upload our memories, our faces, our voices, permanently, endlessly across the world. Maybe I gave it more than just my trail. Maybe I gave it platform. The Wendigo doesn't just hide in the woods now. It watches, it learns, and maybe, just maybe, it subscribes. Concluding paragraph, 300 words. We always believed technology made us invincible, that if we could record it, document it, map it, we could tame it. But there are things older than roads, deeper than data, and colder than anything your camera lens can capture. I went into those woods thinking I was prepared for nature, but I wasn't facing nature. I was facing the echo of something ancient that feeds not just on flesh, but on identity, on self. And in sharing that journey with the world, I may have done something worse than being taken. I may have taught it how to walk among us. The footage is still out there, mirrored, clipped, remixed. 1,000 versions of my face staring back at me from strangers' phones. My voice, bent at unnatural angles, still whispering from speakers I don't control. And every so often, a new channel pops up with my name, my logo, even my intro, but with videos I never made. Campouts in frozen woods I've never visited. Dialogues that twist my real words into something off. It's not imitation anymore. It's inheritance. So if you're reading this, watching this, hearing this, check the source. Check your voice. Ask yourself what part of you you've shared with the world. Because once the echo takes root, it doesn't leave. It learns, it mimics, it waits. And one day when you're most alone, it speaks, just like you.